according to Reuters, which reports that the company delivered 863 jets in 2019, beating expectations. Airbus surpasses US rival Boeing, which has been hit by the grounding of its 737 MAX plane. Airbus did not comment on the figures. The share price strong, 3.3% higher, and the bounce will last 3 months, 14%. Around 400 people were arrested in Hong Kong on New Year's Day after an anti-government rally turned violent, sparking clashes between police and activists. HSBC branches in the Chinese territory were vandalised, with some staying closed today. A pair of lion statues in front of the lender's headquarters were also daubed with graffiti. Protesters claim the bank is complicit in efforts by authorities to shut down fundraising aimed at supporting demonstrators, legal costs. So caught up in some of the acts in Hong Kong, you can see the bank has just been a little bit weak at the start. Steve?
I have been earwigging a brilliant conversation, Karen. You must join us. Alan Custis has joined us, head of UK equities at Lazard Asset Management. Of course, our guest host for the hour, Michael Harris, with us, founder of Cribstone Strategic Macro. Really fascinating. Do you know what? You two could have just carried on chatting and I would have listened in. But unfortunately, my job apparently is to ask some questions. So I'm going to try and replicate the conversation. So for which Michael started off by speaking to Alan and saying, so what are you excited about? What are you interested in? So we'll start off there. We'll try and you've got to do the whole thing all over again. Good morning to you.
Good morning and Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year. What are you excited about?
I'm excited about, I think that we still should be focused very much on domestic stocks for 2020. We saw a sort of shift in the last quarter of last year back into some of those more domestic names. I think it's fair to say that domestic names have lagged the international names in the UK market by quite a margin. And I think notwithstanding the fact that the 250 was a very strong performing index, I think there were large cap value names, domestic, which have been largely left behind. And I was talking to Michael, talking about land securities, for instance. You know, back in June 2016, if I'd have said to you, actually, property stocks will be at their all-time highs into end of 2019, and we hadn't left Europe yet, you'd have gone, no, that cannot happen.
So I don't know why they put up the FTSE MIB. That might be a very inexperienced report. A mid-cap UK, FTSE 250. But anyway, let's get up land securities, land.l. You mentioned land security. You're talking about this perhaps from an international investor looking in at the UK and what have you. My problem with the likes of land securities and British land is actually purely domestic. And the fact that we've come an incredibly long way. I always worry about NAVs compared with stock prices as well. And it's something I always speak to the CEOs, the Griegs and the Knowles of this world about. But I also have a problem with their portfolios because I'm looking at the retail side of things as well and thinking, I don't know where the recovery is coming from for a lot of these players. So just kind of address some of the more domestic issues on a stock which yields somewhere in the region of about 4.7%.
Yeah, nearly 5%. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think the reason why the stock trades at a 30% discount to net asset value is because of these concerns. Although, actually, if you read through their latest capital markets report, you will see that there are 3 retail opportunities in London which are in the process of being converted back to residential.
Isn't that extraordinary?
And that's Lewisham, Enfield, and Shepherd's Bush, I think.
Well, Shepherd's Bush, of course, has seen one of the most successful retail operations, which is the Westfield development, of course.
But if you look at some of these, the market's giving some of these retail opportunities a very low valuation. If you look at but actually, if you look at the gross development value of some of these, and particularly with the new CEO's experience, which is in residential rental, actually the gross development value of some of these things are multiples of what's in the book value. So I think Blue Water, things like that are fine, and that's a big chunk of their retail.
Is it rude of me to say that my wife calls it blue torture? I don't know if that's a well-known acronym. I've only been to the place once. I found it very nice, by the way. I don't tend to go to... But I think that it was quite busy over the Christmas period.
But I do think, seriously, people are overlooking the alternative use. We've seen it with the supermarkets, how the supermarkets are taking some of their excess property, loss-making stores, and converting those back into residential. We talk a lot about residential. Obviously, the Prime Minister's talking about developing residential and whether that's going to be more on the sort of the rental side of things. So I think there's, at a 30% discount, I think there's a lot of value that's sort of built up in those businesses.
Okay, let's go back. Oh, do you want to come in on this? Of course.
Well, I was just going to ask generally, on the view that the Conservatives need to keep those Labour constituencies, and they've got a nice long 5-year runway.
Yeah.
What are the best ways to specifically play that theme of money piling into those areas?
Well, I do think we're going to get the withdrawal agreement. We're then going to get a budget sometime in February, March, and I think that will be very much, and I think it's been sort of showcased in the papers, they're going to be very much orientated toward the northern towns. I think there's probably a very good chance that HS2 gets green lighted, because that would be a push very much towards seeing money go back into northern areas. Just to reiterate
something that you've already made the point about in the first hour, but I want, because I know you do reiterate, because you've said off camera. Why are you also not concerned about this potential looming hard Brexit at the end of this year? We'll have Brexit anyway, at the end of this month, we believe. But at the end of this year, you're not worried, and you think the pound's going to 165. You're not worried because you think, actually, it's very easy to adjust and tweak.
I've been led to believe that it's quite easy to adjust and doesn't require a change in the law to amend it. And I think what we might see is, we get to October, November, Boris Johnson turns around and says, we're very close to a good deal. We need to get an extension for 1 or 2 months, and he can do that. He doesn't need Parliament's approval, as far as I understand it.
And now we have the concept, of course, from Mr. Trump of phase 1. So we don't have to worry about the in-depth, multi-sector trade deal. We can just have the framework trade agreement, can't we?
And everyone worries about it, and the EU say we've got 11 months, this is too short a time. I don't think we're starting from sort of ground zero, if I can use that terminology. So I think it is possible to do it. The importance is it's very easy to get a bad deal. What we obviously want is a good deal.
Yeah.
A lot of stock markets claimed records last year, but the UK stock market didn't. I mentioned the underperformance versus the rest of the European markets. So you've been a little more optimistic that perhaps we start to close the gap. How much higher can we go from here? Because headroom is about 700, some of the highs we've had previously from close to what today, 600 where we start out.
Yeah, I think we're still looking at 15% relative underperformance versus the other European markets. I think we can recoup that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. I mean, I think you have to remember is UK equities have been on outflow. Institutions have clearly been selling equities as part of rebalancing their risk in terms of pension liabilities, but also working in an international office. We haven't seen any of my international colleagues investing in UK equities at all over the last 3.5 years. What we have seen in the last few weeks is some of that money starting to come back into the UK. So whilst people say there's been a torrent of money since the 12th of December, I personally haven't seen it, and I think we're a good microcosm of what's going on, but I do think it's going to continue through 2020, particularly as we get the sort of the news flow that we expect, the withdrawal agreement, and then hopefully progress on the transition, and also phase 1, which we talked about, between China and the US, because remember, the UK is very resource heavy. We've got big oil stocks, and we've clearly got a lot of large mining securities.
I forget where I was reading this morning, but I think it was the Financial Times. So apologies if I've misquoted, but I think it was talking about the dullness of foreign exchange markets at the moment, how central bank action, whatever, has made them very, very consistent performing, lacking volatility assets as well. What about for equities in 2020? Are we going to see consistent, dull performance? Well, actually, I know it's a very hard question, but we've got some black swan type questions I suppose we could ask, but are we going to see some volatility in these equity markets in 2020, or is it just steady as she goes?
I mean, we've had low levels of volatility for some time. I think it's going to be more of the same, unfortunately.
I mean, anyone who's bought protection, by and large, unless they know they're very deft at trading a gamma, has failed. Yeah,
unfortunately, in a way, I think a bit of volatility is not a bad thing. And I do think it's going to be more of the same this year. I think we're going to get, high single-digit returns. Maybe in the UK we get low double-digit returns again, because I still feel that 2019 was very much a reversal of 2018. So when you put both years together, it's not been a banner 2 years for investors.
It's been on average, hasn't it?
It's been very much less than average, because you can say that it's been about 5% or 6%, say, return over the 2 years. So I would still expect, for the facts that we've just talked about, which is, we're going to get some fiscal stimulus in the UK. I think, we've read today that first-time homeowners are almost back to the levels we saw pre-financial crisis. So the UK actually doesn't look a bad place. And I do think that, contrary to what some of the economists were suggesting in the FT yesterday, that actually, GDP could surprise on the upside.
What about global events? We've been talking this morning about a US presidential election cycle clearly could bring more volatility back into the mix, and at least in my view, and based on the inability of investors to read through some of Trump's signals. Every time he tweets or says something, you get that reaction, mostly again concentrated to Wall Street. So why doesn't volatility come back, and why isn't there an impact across other markets in 2020?
I may defer to my colleague on the US, but as far as I'm concerned, you have to go back to I think Bush Senior was the last time you didn't see a president win a second term. So at the moment, I guess, the odds would be on President Trump being successful this year in terms of the presidential elections. I think, has the market sort of got used to the tweets? It feels like it, to a degree, it has got kind of used to them.
I disagree. I don't feel it has. I feel as though you still get very strong market reactions.
Yeah, but
it's trade deal reaction.
The half-life of it's quite short now, isn't it? When we had the toings and froings on the tariffs and everything, the market, go back 3 or 4 months, the market was reacting quite a lot. The last few weeks, it's like, okay, well, we know we're moving towards phase one. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, that falls apart, then I think, yes, you're right, you would get a reaction.
Let me interrupt, if I may. We've had some Spanish data. The December manufacturing PMIs, pretty awful, 47.4. They're in line with the November figure, which was 47.5, give or take a decimal as well. I suppose that's a nice premise to talk about mainland European growth in 2020. Where do you see the best opportunities?
I'm very much a UK specialist,
sure.
So I'm very much focused on
I guess my
on the
better
UK.
question then for you would have been, where do you see the opportunities for British companies or British listed companies in Europe in 2020? Or actually, is that actually a negative, looking at British companies going into mainland Europe in 2020?
That's a very good question, actually.
Better than my first question, anyway.
Yes. we know that obviously Europe is 46% of our exports and obviously very key. Again, we come back to some of the general industrial names. I think I put, aerospace, particularly those supplying into Airbus, are obviously having quite a good time at the moment, looking at it from a UK standpoint. So I think industrials generally, some of which have done very well.
And that points to the mid-caps again, because of this
again,
huge West Midlands engineering hub, and Wales, again, another age that contributes a lot to these international projects.
And I think some of those names have been, impacted by the concerns around Brexit, but if we think that there's been a slight release here, then I think some of these names could do very well in 2020.
The European backdrop and also the US one, I think, is quite interesting in the sense of what type of environment do you need for UK stocks to benefit? Do we have an environment where risk appetite is just generally positive for UK markets, or whether we start to get into a story in 2020 where if there's still weakness across some of these European economies, the investors start to pivot and they start to pick up UK assets because they're looking at a region specific, and the UK might be back in the game with some reduced political risk. So how do you perceive it?
I think that's absolutely. It was interesting that if I go back in my career a long time, the UK was not deemed to be part of Europe from an investment standpoint, and actually we're starting to see people view the UK as a separate asset class once again. I think that potentially grows through 2020. Rather than looking at it as part of a pan-European. Because typically you look at a pan-European portfolio and you'll find it's full of Unilever, Royal Dutch Shell, which is frankly not a lot to do with the UK. And I think people are now starting to say, actually, if I want to play the UK, I need to play some of those UK domestic names, mid-250 type of names, things like that. So I think that could be a very big driver this year.
Might have to change our market opening for 2020.
We'll hold your question. I also want to ask you about oil majors, which is something you want to look at as well, I know, for 2020. But for now, we'll hold fire on that as well. Just safe to say, coming up on the show, hedge funds came under pressure in 2019. Oh, diddums. Did they still make their 2 and 20 though? Well, who knows? But what does the start of the new decade hold for them? We'll have plenty more after the break.
Now get greedy whenever you want. Subscribe to the American Greed.
Hello, I'm here at the Race for Life 5K, joined by Jackie Clark. Jackie, what would first place today mean to you?
I think you've got the wrong race, love. This is Race for Life. This is about beating cancer, not getting a gold medal.
And how did you train for this event?
I just turned up. It's a walk in the park, literally. Why aren't you doing it? Trainers on, let's go.
We're not athletes, we're cancer beaters. Sign up to Race for Life now and get 30% off entry until the 31st of January in partnership with Tesco.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three is up and in!
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
The hedge fund industry said goodbye to another painful year. 2019 was filled with more and more funds shutting down. CNBC's Leslie Picker has the hedge fund playbook for 2020.
More truces, fewer proxy fights, and new rules are 3 key themes in focus for activist investing in 2020. First, more truces. When Elliott settled with AT&T in October, it did so in a unique way. AT&T announced several proposed changes that Elliott recommended, but the hedge fund did not get any board seats, nor was it prohibited from public fights in the future. Industry watchers say these non-standstill settlements will become more popular because they can make both sides happy while avoiding expensive and time-consuming proxy contests. Which leads to our second theme, fewer proxy fights. In the first 3 quarters of the year, there were only 9 proxy contests reaching a vote. That's less than half of the 20-plus contests that's become the norm over the last 6 years. Lastly, new rules. The SEC is looking to enact new regulations of proxy advisory firms like ISS and Glass Lewis, which advise investors on how to vote on governance issues. These new rules make it easier to sue proxy advisory firms for false statements and reports, among other things. They have been opposed by activists like Carl Icahn, who say the regulations make it, quote, even more difficult and expensive to practice activist investing.
I think you know.
Alan Custis is with us, chatting away with Karen now about... In fact, you know what? I'll let him carry on this conversation. You're talking about... I want to ask you about oils, but first of all, Karen's asked you about retailers. She's asked you specifically about Marks and Spencer's. It is a name that you've cited, so tell us what you think.
Yeah, I think, as we were saying earlier, obviously the Ocado tie-up with Marks and Spencer's has been consummated. We are seeing some strong food data. I mean, the thing is not to get confused with this time of year. Obviously, Marks always traditionally does well because it seemed to be, you know, food that's appropriate for the festive season. But I do think that having Ocado on side, the amount of SKUs that they are going to put out means that the food side of the business actually is going to go from strength to strength. The issue is obviously has been on the apparel side, and we do see some reasons to be slightly more encouraged by what's happening on the apparel side. 50% of women still shop at Marks and Spencer's. So it's not a case of actually losing footfall. It's a question of converting that footfall into having bigger basket sizes.
There's a lot of different partnerships too that can be brought through this tie-up. And I saw one recently. I mean, there's a tie-up with a pet food delivery system with Ocado. And when you click on all the options, it just brings your details across from Ocado to that one website. It's sort of the early beginnings for an M&S revival story, potentially for online, if you can bring all the details across to other areas of the business and sell more product, not just food.
Absolutely, and you only need to look at Next to see how that can be successfully. I mean, Next retail consistently has negative like-for-likes. Next online business has consistently grown very, very strongly over the years. And we do see something like this happening at Marks.
And yet M&S, 2004, there we were with a bid, £4 a share, got up to £7 after Stuart Rose, and now a very low 2.15. But let's see what happens. Anyway, I need to ask you about the oils. Bob Dudley has just been named as the Sunday Times Business Person of the Year over at BP on the 28th of December. I can totally understand why. He's had all the same issues as every other executive, plus Macondo as well. But oil investment going forward with ESG as a backdrop, this is going to be very tricky, despite the fact you get a 6 to 7% yield on these stocks. What do you think?
I agree. It's quite a hard starting point. I think you take a view on oil itself. We still use 100 million barrels of the stuff a day at the moment, give or take. And
that's just that's odd.
And that's
you mean it's a global economy, of course. Yes,
of course, yes. And and OPEC has clearly before the festive season talked about cuts and taking various definitions out of their definition of production. So we see quite a balanced oil market in 2020. I think the reason for the interest is if you look at BP and indeed Royal Dutch Shell last year, they massively underperformed the market. If you look at them on a 2-year basis, it was a bit more aligned with the market. But we do see a business where the break-even points are coming down. We do see the transition, importantly the transition, and coming back to the question around ESG, we very much take the view that we want to be part of that transition conversation rather than just sell. I do appreciate that, and we get a lot of questions from my clients talking about why we hold these stocks. Our view is it's very easy to sell it, but who are you selling them to? And do those people really care about the environment and what's going to happen with these projects? So we're very much in the camp about engagement with these businesses, and what we're seeing clearly with both BP and Shell and the other super majors is this transition away from oil and oil primarily into other forms, whether it be solar, whether it be wind. I mean, we know Royal Dutch Shell, has ambitions to be the biggest utility in Europe.
No, I think there's an ambition issue, and
coming from a very attractive valuation.
So I had an extraordinary 24 hours or so this autumn where I was with the Extinction Rebellion on the grounds in Trafalgar Square. Then I would go to a very swanky hotel up the road and do Oil and Money, and so I get to speak to Ben Van Beurden, Bob Dudley, and the Extinction Revolution. And the point is about ambition. And what was really interesting, you mentioned oil. You mentioned solar and wind, what have you, but you didn't mention gas. So I think the ambition for these guys, oil and gas players, is to become gas and oil players, whereas renewables is still going to be a bit of a sideline, to be honest, as well. So the Extinction Revolution or Rebellion and the ESG players don't even want gas. These players see gas as the key. And I think if we can sort out the relationship between gas and the transition of energy going forward, then we'll have the key to this.
I absolutely agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why I excluded gas from that comment, because I do think gas is going to be around for a long time. Oil, you can have a question mark over, when we're going to get electric planes. Some people say 2030, some people say 2050.
Not just electric planes, electric boats.
Everything
is shipped
but
around
you will
the world
still need energy to power
hydrocarbons.
those. And as we've seen, through winter time, there is actually no wind, so we will still need power generation. That has to, at the moment, be clearly not going to be coal. The only way it's going to be is gas. And so I think these businesses they're clearly very big gas players already.
And I just want to clarify something that Steve said. He said ESG not being interested, in a sense, and you say you have an answer for your clients. Our investors...
We don't have an answer for our clients, but we
well, no, you do have a creative answer.
We think it's very important to engage at all levels to make sure that the management of oil companies are incentivized from a compensation standpoint to see this transition through.
Totally get it. So my question is, do you have clients that are saying no to oil and gas, or is it that perception that ESG means you can't invest in oil? Is that correct or not?
Do we have clients who say no to oil and gas? We have clients who are being challenged by their clients why we hold oil and gas investments.
Right.
We haven't got to the stage yet, for certainly my clients, where they've said, no, we don't want any oil and gas holdings. So I think it's slightly different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think ESG is it's not the yes and no list. It's not like the sin things where they say we're definitely not having that. And I don't think oil has gotten to that stage. If it did, it'd be quite dangerous for valuations.
This is what Mr. Carney has to say.
No, I was about to say that was maybe an unhelpful comment.
To his credit or not, or whatever way you want to put it, the pivotal speech he made a couple of years ago about unburnable, unextractable and uninvestables. Well, I thought that was quite extraordinary and actually got the debate going, whether you like it, what he's saying or not. We can leave it there.
It's amazing how he can get that debate going, but there's no debate about everyone in this country borrowing for mortgages sub 2 years. And it's crazy. That's his biggest legacy mistake, and it's going to burn this country at one stage.
Oh, right. Thanks for that. We're going to leave this conversation now. Alan, thank you very much. Nice to see you, and we'll see you, of course, a lot more in 2020. Alan Custis, who is head of UK equities, Lazard Asset Management. Michael, you can make that point after the break. I think it's very interesting. Coming up on the show as well, though, President Trump threatens Iran over attacks on the US Embassy in Baghdad. The Iranian Supreme Leader replied, you can't do anything. Well, more on that debate after the break.
Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three is up and in!
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow
Bayless.
at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Want TuneIn to remind you when the big NFL game is about to get underway? Be sure notifications are allowed on your phone and search NFL on the TuneIn app. Find the game you want to hear under events and tap Notify Me. We'll let you know exactly when it's time to listen in for kickoff.
Let's have a look at European equities. They are starting the new decade in the green with all major indices moving higher after China cuts its triple R yet again to further boost its slowing economy. Miners outperforming after Beijing's easing, whilst President Trump sets a date for the signing of a Phase 1 trade deal. Airbus shares rallying hard after Reuters reports the French company has reclaimed its spot as the world's largest plane maker. This after delivering 863 jets in 2019, surpassing its great rival Boeing. Plus, questions mounting now over Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan, whilst a lawyer says the ex-Nissan boss will hold a press conference on January 8th.
It's a strong start for most European markets to a brand new year and decade. Early pictures, you can see positive from the FTSE, 0.75% in the green, 0.8 even more on the French market, and solid too for the IBEX in Spain. The Italian market and the AEX. Out of lockstep to an extent has been the German stock market from the outset, where we saw a patch of red flash up as the starting position, but now shedding some of that red ink to move into positive territory, joining the rest of the European indices in the green, just over 0.25%, 13,283, but picking up again on very strong levels as we closed out 2019. The European markets notched up about 23% across the course of the year. So it is with that high that they begin 2020. And let's switch over the charts and just take a look at some of these up close. And you can see mostly green by stock levels. What has been giving some of these markets a boost, if you drill down the FTSE, I think was a great example of that. In some of the trade-heavy areas of the market, there is hope that we will get that Phase 1 trade deal signed on the 15th of January. That is what US President Donald Trump has been tweeting. But also out of China today, there's been some stimulus measures. The PBOC is going to be cutting the amount of cash the banks must hold as reserves, so effectively releasing around $115 billion. So that is a solid boost from one central bank to start out the year. But a whole bunch of positives from central banks, the PBOC, to the trade issues, and also hopes that you will see a US Federal Reserve that will have learned its lesson from 2018. So with those positives, you can see European markets starting out on positive footing. Steve.
Thank you very much, Karen. Okay, tensions between Iran and the US have been escalating over attacks on the American embassy in Baghdad. Leaders from both countries weighed in amid developments on the ground. NBC's Hans Nichols has the latest.
For a second day, violent demonstrations at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. U.S. forces firing tear gas as protesters set tires on fire and tried to scale the compound's walls while Iraqi security forces stand guard. But late today, the Iranian-backed demonstrators packing up and dispersing after their militia leaders ordered a retreat. President Trump sending 750 troops from the 82nd Airborne to the region to counter the Iranian threat after 100 Marines arrived within hours of the siege.
We had some great warriors come in and do a fantastic job, and they were there instantaneously as soon as we heard this will never, ever be a Benghazi.
In Iraq, no demonstrators made it inside the walls of the massive embassy complex. President Trump blames the attack on Iran, saying he would hold them responsible. But today, the country's top religious leader hitting back on Twitter. You can't do anything. All part of a tense standoff with Iran, with Iranian-backed forces repeatedly targeting U.S. troops in the region, including an attack on Americans last Friday, which prompted a U.S. strike on an Iranian-backed militia this week. Last night, the president was asked about the prospects of war.
I don't think that would be a good idea for Iran. It wouldn't last very long. Do I want to? No. I want to have peace. I like peace.
I was just saying to the panel around the desk just how I should introduce, actually, first of all, Chris Weafer's with us as well. He is CEO of Macro Advisory. We'll come to this read in a moment, but I was just saying what a master communicator this man is, regardless of what you think of him politically, whether you like him or dislike him, whether you're a Democrat, Republican or floater. Trump there just saying this will never be another Benghazi, and straight away he's talking about an Iran policy issue, but he's making a reference to, of course, when the Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton, was in charge of the State Department at the time of the Benghazi, Libya siege. He is incredible the way he gets his messages across, isn't he?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the list of all the Democratic candidates are. what he's prepared to say about each of them once one of them elevates. But for the time being, he's still, stuck focusing on Obama and Clinton.
Almost anything. It's Chris, do you want to jump in on kind of master communicate? Mr. Putin held his very, very long address, or press conference. Again, anything notable come from that one before Christmas?
No, this was particularly focused on the domestic economy, kind of, again, making promises that he would kind of deal with social issues, and critically, of course, several times, I guess what he emphasized the fact that in 2020 that the government would work towards finally rebuilding disposable income, household income, in other words, personal wealth, which has lagged in the last 6 years. And that's very important as we kind of move closer to the election process.
We've discussed for the whole of the last decade plus. He was elected to deliver two things. One, security. Two, economic well-being for Russia as well. Let's get to the read, because I know I need to do that before. I haven't introduced you properly, so... Yeah, okay. Tighter US sanctions against Iran and Venezuela were the biggest factors for oil prices in 2019. According to our next guest, yes, Chris Weaver is the CEO of Macro Advisor. Good morning, sir. Good morning. Good. Look, I'm fascinated by what you've written in your report as well. And the headline is Oil, Russia wins from US sanctions and Saudi cuts. But is the broader Russian economy gaining? Because as we all know, if oil goes up, the exchequer revenues go up as well. Fantastic from that point of view as well. But is the diversity of the Russian economy suffering every time oil goes up, and that the Russian hydrocarbon industry benefits?
Okay, unfortunately, that's a yes and a no answer. Okay, if we go back historically, yes, there was a very clear correlation between economic activity and the oil price. One went up, the other went with it. Now, that had changed in the last several years, and one of the reasons is because of the need to react to sanctions, the 2014 sanctions. And from that, we have what is referred to as the budget rule. Now, the budget rule means that the federal budget now assumes oil only at $44 average, and anything above that, any earnings above that, are diverted to the Sovereign Wealth Fund to be used for longer-term projects. So after several years of this kind of new policy, Russia's got a very strong balance sheet. So the national fund's got about $140 billion. The federal budget will have, we believe, will have shown a surplus of around $30 billion last year after $44 billion the previous year. The level of debt national debt's only about 15%, only about 3% external debt. So Russia's in very good financial position. The problem is the level of growth is too low. The economy is almost kind of in a stagnant mode. Likely GDP will have expanded by about 1.3 or 1.4% last year, having expanded by 2.3 the previous year. It needs to get up towards 3% in the next 2 years. And the kind of whole, therefore, emphasis in Russia is how do we use this financial firepower, which is building at the current oil price. And that's why in this report we refer to U.S. sanctions against Iran and Venezuela, which have taken out another 1 million barrels of oil from the market last year. And of course, Saudi discipline, as we've seen, and again at the December meeting, where they not only agreed to the extension of the OPEC Plus deal, but they threw in another 400,000 barrels of cut, voluntarily to keep the price up. And Russia's, of course, benefiting from that. The budget will likely balance at $45 this year. So at 65 or 66, the current price, you're heading for another $30 billion surplus. And again, that gives the government a lot of options. When we get to the spring, which we believe is what will happen, we get to the spring, if the economy is not responding to measures that were put in place last year, in other words, if the pace of growth is not picking up, and in particular, if kind of like household wealth's not picking up, then they have the financial resources to put more money into some areas of the economy to try and kick it up.
I want to steer you to the oil price and what might lie ahead, because it feels like with all this intervention and more cooperation with the Russians and OPEC, that you had an actual fairly stable year for oil, relatively speaking. If you look at the 5 years that came prior to that, there were wild gyrations in the price. What does it mean for 2020, another more stable year for the price because of this coordination?
Yeah, well, as we come into 2020, that would be kind of the reasonable assumption to make. There are three critical factors when it comes to the oil price next year, as was the case in the year just gone. First is, what will be the level of demand? I mean, obviously, that was a factor in creating volatility last year, particularly with regard to the backdrop of the US-China trade talks. China, of course, and Asia being a big consumer, particularly a big consumer of new oil. We see oil consumption drifting lower in Europe and Japan as consumers switch to renewables or electric engines. But the strong growth is in Asia, in China, in India, and other Asian countries. So U.S. trade, China talks were a big factor in that. If we do get a deal, that will put more comfort behind the assumption of demand growth. That will help. The second factor is how long will the OPEC Plus deal last? That is now extended to the end of March, and Russia and OPEC have said they will then review the situation in March, indicating that if necessary they will extend the deal to keep the oil price stable above 60. But potentially the big kind of uncertainty this year, and it's already beginning to be talked about, is can or will the U.S. producers be able to continue to add as much extra volume as they have been for the last 7 or 8 years?
And can they?
Yeah. Well, this is a huge question. The International Energy Agency are forecasting U.S. oil production and therefore oil exports to rise by about 1.2 million barrels this year, which is roughly equal to what they're assuming will be global demand growth. Where there's other agencies saying, no, we're running into geological problems, you're running into efficiency problems, and therefore output growth might be, in some instances, some were saying, say, 500,000. I saw one report last week saying that it could drop to as little as 200,000. If you were to get that decline in U.S. growth and OPEC holds the line, then you could see the oil price trading above $80. If, on the other hand, U.S. demand or production stays as IEA expects, matches demand, then you're relying on OPEC to discipline, in which case more or less a similar year as we've seen this year.
Got a question. Let me just jump in a second, because literally now I've got the Italian IHS market manufacturing data, which is an appallingly low figure, really. It's very just underlining the problems we see across Europe. It's coming at 46.2 versus the 47.6 figure we were expecting in November, just underlining the problems that the European economy has and how difficult it's going to be for policymakers to move the needle both at a monetary and a fiscal level. Mike, you want to come back to this story?
Well, do you think the broader investor universe appreciates, I guess, two things? One is that Russia has much less political and populist risk, let's say, because it's very tactical.
Yeah.
Putin's very strongly in control. So effectively, relative to even a lot of developed countries, that risk does exist. But the other thing is, I think what you said is interesting about the budget flexibility they have associated with the sovereign fund. But I find one of the most powerful emerging market reforms that has happened in the last decade was Russia basically switching from a country that feared dollarization in a crisis to now one where if oil were to weaken at one stage, the currency is now a safety valve.
Yes.
Is that overstating it, or is Russia effectively, oil-proof is too strong a word, but assuming oil doesn't collapse, they have created a lot of flexibility because they're allowing now the currency to take up the pressure.
I think that's a reasonable statement. And this is something that actually has been forced on them as a result of this combination of the 2014 sanctions, which happened at the same time as the oil price collapse. So faced with that double external whammy, the government was forced into taking actions that had been talked about for years, but avoidable, but then suddenly they became necessary in 2015 and 16. And you're absolutely right. The change in currency management has been a huge factor in stabilizing the economy and has also led to revival, or if not say just new growth, in some sectors such as agriculture. Russia is now the world's biggest exporter of wheat, which before 2014 it was importing. And other areas of the economy are benefiting from that sort of flexibility. But had we not got the 2014 sanctions and oil price combination, we'd probably be still talking about this as something that was desirable rather than something that's happened.
Chris, we've actually got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming in to see us. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
Chris Weaver with us, CEO of Macro Advisory. Michael Harris staying with us, our guest host today. Plenty coming up on the show. We're including more on the PMI data, a stock take on how key economies France and Germany are faring. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm back. I just set a personal best on my park run. Feels great.
That's lovely, Mike. I think you've earned the right to put all the bins out.
Hey?
With Vitality Life Insurance, you get properly rewarded when you're active. In fact, you could save over £730 every year in discounts and rewards from our partners. Join over 1 million customers. Just search Vitality Life. Vitality. Positively different. Annual savings available with certain plans and are dependent on members' usage of rewards available. Terms and conditions apply.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Catch your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three is up and in.
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
On the goal line, scores and takes it home.
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores.
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
And a move, and a shot, and he scores.
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today. You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
First round of the year, it's like, who has to do the French PMIs? Who won?
Was it Bags Not?
Was it Bagsy or Bagsy Not? I don't know, I don't care. French PMIs, I'll do it. IHS market December final manufacturing figure, done. Oh, 50.4 as opposed to the flash estimate of 50.3. I think we can move on. I'm so uninterested.
We're the opposite of every other anchor who actually wants to do everything.
Tell them. Tell them.
No, it's mine, it's mine.
Well, look, we've still got the German fight to come before the end of the show. Yes, German PMI is still due, everybody. But in the meantime, Michael Harris has said, can we talk about Iran? So let's do that. Is that an outlier, a black swan for 2020?
Yeah, no, I think without a doubt, because we have to assume that Trump is, we talk about getting used to his behavior, but this is the first time he will be going into an election in power. And it's very clear he doesn't want to lose the election. And so we have to, when the parameters of the goalpost have changed about acceptable behavior associated with a political aim, we have to ask ourselves, and we've seen this in plenty of other countries, and even in developed countries where a lot of time it's been stealthier, but you can see a scenario, if Trump is lagging meaningfully in the polls by the time we get to June, July, a geopolitical event where people rally around the flag might be his only avenue to winning, and people would rally around the flag if the U.S. attacks Iran. So I feel strongly that if we think about 2020 equity asset positioning, you need to have a hedge in there for a summertime event.
So hang on, you are saying, if I look at the chronology of events, that actually this all didn't happen tail end of last year after the refinery tax in Saudi Arabia, because nobody locally wanted this to happen, whether you were in Tehran, whether you were in Riyadh, and as you say, in Washington as well. You're saying President Trump would risk shutting the Straits of Hormuz and creating a huge Middle East war potentially if he's lagging in the polls?
If he felt that was the only route to winning the election, I would say you have to consider that a distinct possibility, because the idea of him lagging significantly in the polls with the economy doing well, he's going to say, well, what else can I do, right? He might attack the Fed, but if the economy is already doing well, that might not be the issue. Pulling something out of a box, Iran's going to be easy because Americans historically hate Iran. So the idea of Americans not rallying around the flag...
No, Americans don't historically hate Iran. depends how far you're going back. Iran actually was a very, very close ally in the 60s and early 70s of the United States.
Okay, they hate the current Iranian regime, which has been in there since 1979. And I remember...
But you know why I'm going there on this one as well? Because the relationship with Riyadh, the relationship with Tehran, the relationship with all of these capitals and regimes, it does depend a lot on, of course, personality, as well as the regime that was placed in previously, dare I say, and by the imperial powers.
Let me say it this simply, okay? If the U.S. attacks Iran, Trump will get at least a 5% bump in the polls, a minimum. And I think it's almost impossible he can lose an election.
If oil goes to $200 a barrel?
No, it's not about oil going to $200 a barrel.
It's about pump prices going up if the Straits of Hormuz are shut. And you're saying a president can win on that basis economically?
People will rally around the flag. So
even if, because of direct actions of Mr. Trump, people are paying twice what they're paying now at the pumps for their gasoline.
This only happens if he knows he doesn't have a chance otherwise. And it doesn't definitively happen, but if he's thinking about his election toolkit, I would be stunned if that's not part of his toolkit.
Assuming that is the option, right, and there could be some other event, if your strategy is correct, does that mean you just buy gold? If you're thinking from an investor strategy, you need a hedge.
No, a hedge, okay? Not buy, you don't position for this.
You don't know what it is.
You don't position for this, so you hedge for an oil spike, as you just said, what would happen in that environment.
But
maybe it's just risk off.
The strategy may not be to target Tehran. It may not be to go after Iran, which case the oil hedge doesn't work.
If it's after North Korea, whatever it ends up being, any strategy would be create a risk-off environment. So, but Iran's the easiest because obviously the template is there to get there. They'll provoke, and up until now, Trump has to hold back, which he can easily get away with. But on balance, I don't think you don't price this in. You don't say this is going to happen. But relative to U.S. history, in a presidential election cycle, we have to think about things that will be done only to achieve a selfish election result and not what's in the best interest of the country.
Let's move on, because Karen and I are now going to debate who does the German data. Would you like
I've got it. The German IHS market December numbers just crossing the tape and promptly disappearing, as I said. I've got
43.7 as opposed to 43.4. I've managed to get it in here.
I had it, and then it just went...
But I think that's fascinating. So an optimist will say, oh, it's on the turn, it's improving. I would turn around and say, that is a blooming awful figure still coming out of Europe's largest economy.
Well, Germany doesn't have demographic pressure. It's got very huge brand equity, right, in terms of its company. So a lot of people are all super negative on where the auto sector is going. We know this. The German auto sector will invest tremendously to make this transition when it happens. So as it happens, which is already happening. So on balance, I don't think we need to be overly pessimistic about low growth in Germany because unemployment will stay low and spending power will continue to be there. So the fears associated with countries that don't have demographic pressures are probably, there's a misalignment of expectations regarding what nominal growth
I've really enjoyed the conversation last 2 hours. It's been very stimulating on a whole host of issues. So thank you very much indeed for that. Nice to see you today. And Happy New Year. Michael Harris, founder of Cribstone Strategic Macro. Now, I can't talk because I've only worked 1 day so far this week, but this is it for you. You've done 1 day and you're done.
I'm going to go back on holiday.
One and done.
You would let me do the PMIs.
So have a great long
See you
weekend.
next week.
You deserve it. I think I've got Amanda Drury tomorrow, haven't I, as well? So swapping one great Antipodean for another as well. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow.
A lot of people treat their finances like their health, and for some reason they don't want to peel back the...
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night, and somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here, testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use, and the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
Hello, I'm here at the Race for Life 5K, joined by Jackie Clark. Jackie, what would first place today mean to you?
I think you've got the wrong race, love. This is Race for Life. This is about beating cancer, not getting a gold medal.
And how did you train for this event?
I just turned up. It's a walk in the park, literally. Why aren't you doing it?
Trainers on, let's go. We're not athletes, we're cancer beaters. Sign up to Race for Life now and get 30% off entry until the 31st of January in partnership with Tesco.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Be better informed, be better prepared. The Better Network is on TuneIn. This is Brent Musburger. Search BETR and start hanging out with me and my guys in the desert weekday afternoons. The Better Network is now on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
You might already know that TuneIn allows you to listen to all the pro sports leagues wherever you go. But did you know TuneIn is also home to the wide world of college sports?
Open three, DeAndre Hunter got it! Handoff Carruthers, big hole right side. He leaps and he surges in, touchdown!
From live college football, basketball, and baseball games to podcasts and coaches shows fueling your love for the game in your school. And the best part is, it's all free. Search college sports to find your team or league.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slammed it down.
Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three is up and in.
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Good morning and welcome to Street Signs. I'm Jemana Versace and these are your morning headlines. European stocks start a new decade in the green with all major indices and sectors moving higher after China cut its RRR again to further boost its slowing economy. Miners outperform after Beijing's easing, while President Trump sets a date for the signing of a Phase 1 trade deal. Airbus shares soar after Reuters reports the French company has reclaimed its spot as the world's largest plane maker after delivering 863 jets in 2019, surpassing its rival Boeing. Plus, questions mount over Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan, while a lawyer says the ex-Nissan boss will hold a press conference on January the 8th. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year, and thank you for tuning in to CNBC on January the 2nd. Lots to get through today. But first, I just want to start with data. We are getting the final Eurozone manufacturing data for the month of December. So that has come in for the Eurozone as a whole, higher than the flash estimate. It has come in at 46.3 versus the initial estimate of 45.9. So in aggregate, while the manufacturing downturn obviously deepened towards the end of 2019, we are seeing signs that things are beginning to stabilize somewhat, or at least move in the right direction. In terms of individual countries, just before Street Signs started, we would have had the German final manufacturing PMI numbers that came in 43.7 versus the flash estimate at 43.4. So Germany, one of the reasons that the aggregate number is higher than the flash. Also France coming in at 50.4 versus the flash estimate of 50.3. One of the disappointing countries, however, was Italy. The manufacturing number there came in at 46.2 versus the flash estimate of 47.6. So on the margin, we're looking at better numbers for Germany and France, worse manufacturing numbers for Italy. On the whole, for Eurozone, though, the numbers are a little bit higher than expected. And you can see that the euro hasn't really reacted much. We are trading above 112, though. On the last 6 months, the euro is trading softer to the tune of about 0.6 of a percentage point. And for the year, for all of 2019, we were down marginally in the euro to the tune of about 2% as well versus the greenback. Obviously, a strong year for the dollar last year. All right, let's introduce Christian Nolting, the global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management, who's going to be joining me for the next half hour. So, Christian, your take on the Eurozone PMI numbers that have come out this morning. It seems to suggest that the data in Europe has softened, but is stabilizing in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think that's good news at the beginning of the year. So happy New Year from my side as well. I think that's seeing the trend. We have seen very weak manufacturing data last year, and now it seems to stabilize a little bit. And I think that's good news in order to be able for Euroland to avoid the recession, which is also a forecast for 2020. But we shouldn't forget it's still lower growth to be expected. So for the Eurozone, we expect 0.9% growth. Again, no recession. But it's still weak data. And if you look at PMI, it's far beyond or below 50 still. So we are not out of the woods yet. But no recession. I think that's good news for 2020.
No recession. We spent all of 2019 talking about the European recession, but there is no recession in sight, not in Europe or not anywhere. Christian, your thoughts on Euro going into 2020? It's been pretty boring, if I'm honest, the last couple of months. We've been in a very tight range between 110, 112. Do you see that changing this year?
Correct. Not so much, to be very honest. I think we see a little bit central banks out-dovish themselves, so the Fed also not being interested, and also the US president not being interested in a very strong dollar. We could imagine, though, for 2020, and that's probably a bit different to 2019, that the euro gets a little bit stronger because we don't expect further measures from the ECB. So our forecast for euro dollar is 115. It's not far away from here, sideways movement, but slightly stronger euro. I think we have seen the peak in the US dollar. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more, let's say, talk about a weaker dollar coming in, because the US clearly doesn't want to have a weaker currency, a stronger currency, obviously. And from that perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some tweets from President Trump this year to again talk about not to have a strong dollar. So from that perspective, it could be different from 19, that we get a slightly stronger euro, but not a massive one, actually.
So perhaps we move from the realms of a trade war to a currency war. Christian, we'll pick up that conversation shortly. I'll come back to you in a few moments. Christian Nolting, the global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management. All right, it is the first trading day of 2020. How are European markets faring? Well, the roaring 20s are off to a roaring start. Here is the picture for European equities. Every single one of the bourses is trading nicely up in the green. We've got FTSE 100 up about 70 points, 0.9 of a percentage point higher for the UK index. And obviously, it was a very strong quarter to end the quarter in 2019, especially in the coming weeks, of the weeks after the general election. So 0.9 of a percentage point firm on the FTSE 100. The DAX in Germany up about 0.6 of a percentage point. CAC 40, the leader today, up 1.2%. And obviously, all eyes on Airbus, one of these strong names today in the stock 600. And then the Italian index also off to a good start. So a very solid start for European bourses, and namely boosted by optimism surrounding the potential signing date of the Phase 1 trade deal between US and China, and of course, developments in China overnight. So let me take you to them. China's PBOC says it will lower the levels of reserves that banks must hold. That frees up around $115 billion in funds to boost a slowing economy. It is the 8th time the central bank has cut the reserve ratio requirement since early 2018. Now, the RRR rate will stand at 12.5% when the cut takes effect on January the 6th. So this RRR cut was the main catalyst for equity moves overnight. The Shanghai Composite up around 1.1%. And obviously, we are seeing a big move in the miners in Europe today as well on the back of that. Basic Resources, clear exposure there to China via the export links. Antofagasta in the UK up 2.7%. Anglo-American 1.5%. So a lot of these miners are actually clustered in the UK. One of the reasons why the FTSE 100 is having a good start to the year and the decade, I should say. But let's talk about some of the price action in China and in Asian markets. Tanveer Gill joins us from Singapore. And Tanveer, I believe this is the 8th RRR cut since 2018. The Chinese authorities are really going for it when it comes to the RRR cut and in terms of injecting stimulus into the system. How are markets reacting?
Very positively, Giovanna. A very happy New Year to you and to all your viewers out there in Europe. It's a very positive start, actually, to the trading year. Not big bang losses or gains coming in for the markets, but suffice to say that in that all green screen, you are looking at the Kospi, perhaps giving way down by about 1% for that market. Even though the underlying economic fundamentals have not looked that bad, the recent PMI releases in Kospi signal that things may have bottomed out for the economy. But I think Kospi as a market reflects what's happening as a fallout of the US-China trade tussle, and there is a direct impact setting in to that market's trade on account of what may come by on that equation. But other than that, most of the region looking very, very positive. You touched upon the RRR cuts coming in from the BBOC, helping lift sentiment in the Greater China markets. You can see after a stupendous run in 2019, 23% done for the Shanghai Composite all of the year gone by. We are looking at those markets building on those gains into today's session, essentially, by the time we close trade, looking up across the board. And mind you, with this $115 billion injection coming in from the PBOC, one wonders whether actually these RRR cuts are taking effect on the ground. And if you look at the recent data, whether it's the official PMI read or the Caixin PMI read, which measures the gauge between small and mid-tier firms, it seems like things are troughing for the Chinese economy. The slowdown has indeed found its base. And that's the reason why in the Hong Kong market, despite the ongoing protests happening on the sidelines, we have seen a bit of a facelift in today's session and a good start to trade there. And, all of this just comes together to really talk about and reference to the fact that going into 2020, the big theme will be about growth recovery. And the early signs of that were captured today with the release of the Q4 GDP numbers in Singapore, which is why the Straits Times also ended high by about 1%. Singapore reported a 0.8% growth in Q4, which is a slight pickup from their Q3 read, largely led by services. And that just puts the spotlight squarely on how all the policy action, central bank action that we witnessed in 2019, whether that'll come to the fore with seeing a fair amount of recovery in Asian growth, and that'll then spill over into growth for the world at large. So broadly speaking, a very positive start to 2020, but whether or not we can build on the gains that we made in 2019 remains to be seen. Back to you, Jamal.
Yeah, that's certainly the big question. With global equities having done so well in 2019, can that performance be repeated in 2020? Well, certainly if we take today as a litmus test, the answer is yes. Tanvir, thank you very much for breaking it down for us from Singapore. Now, more news from China. Growth in China's manufacturing sector continued in December, according to a private survey. The Caixin manufacturing PMI came in at 51.5. That is above the 50-point mark that indicates an expansion. Still, the figure missed expectations for a reading of 51.7. A rise in new orders boosted the print in a month where the U.S. and China struck a Phase 1 trade deal, easing tensions between the two countries. Now, China's decision to implement temporary tariff cuts on more than 850 products came into effect on Wednesday, this according to the country's 2020 tariff schedule. The finance ministry had said that the addition of over 100 items to last year's list was to cope with local shortages amid a slowing economy. Pork and avocados are among the included imports, which were announced days after news emerged of China agreeing to increase agricultural imports from the U.S. as part of a preliminary trade deal. But of course, we don't have an actual nominal amount of which they've agreed to. And President Trump has set a date for the official signing of the Phase 1 deal. According to his Twitter account, this ceremony will take place on January the 15th at the White House. The U.S. leader added that he would make a subsequent trip to Beijing to begin Phase 2 talks. Now, a report in the South China Morning Post said that the country's Vice Premier Liu He will make the trip to Washington for the proceedings. All right, let's get back out to Christian Nolting, Global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management, who's been waiting patiently on the line. Christian, now that Phase 1 deal is pretty much almost done and dusted, do we have to worry about Phase 2?
I think we don't have to worry about Phase 2, but I would just not expect too much from Phase 2. So Phase 1 is okay, and I think it's a success for both sides to get something done. I think the good news here is that we don't see a further escalation of the trade war. So they are able to talk and they find some, let's say, compromises. I think Phase 2 might take a lot of time. I'm not sure it will come in before election date 2020, so this year. It might take some time. So from that perspective, I would not put too much optimism in that. Again, good news is that we don't have a worsening of the situation, but I wouldn't bet too much on China, US solving for everything. So phase 2 might, as I said, take some time. It won't be a full comprehensive solution from my point of view. So not too positive on this one from that perspective.
But at least it resolves some of the uncertainties for the time being. I want to take you back to what we were just discussing about 2019. And obviously people talked a lot about the risk of recession. And it seems like a lot of those fears now have subsided. My colleague Tanvir, when she was just talking about the markets, was saying that this could be a year of growth discovery. Investors are going to be looking for the economies, the stock markets, the stocks that offer the most growth potential. Where do you see those pockets yourself?
Well, first of all, I think, yes, we can be optimistic to avoid a recession, but I wouldn't say this is a massive growth recovery. If you compare the growth rates of 19, our forecast for 2020 is lower. So that's something we shouldn't forget. Given that, which asset classes I would look into, given the low interest rates and yields we see across the world, especially here in Euroland, I would still say there's some room for growth in equity space. But I would be really surprised, to be very open here, if we can repeat last year's performance. So we are going for 5 to 7% growth in the equity market, which is slightly below average. And interestingly, we shouldn't forget, if you look a little bit longer time, and not only 2019, we had a quite tough Q4 2018 markets. So if you have a rolling review of the return you could get, you see over the last years that yields and returns on the equity market are also slightly coming down, which is reflected in the lower growth numbers. So 5 to 7%, I think, if we get there at the end of the year, if that's another positive year, I think we could be very satisfied with that.
Yeah, I mean, 5 to 7% return on equities after 20% this year, that's not too bad. I'll take it. I was reading your report about the 6 big themes to watch out for 2020. And one of your first big themes is that you expect the push for fiscal spending to become more vocal, but you don't actually expect any big fiscal boost. Who do you think is going to be disappointing here? Is it Eurozone or is it China that are just not going to live up to expectations?
I think the big discussion for 2020 is probably what are the central banks going to do. They have been a driver of markets for a very long time now, and we call 2020 the year. The question is that the end of monetary magic? Because markets certainly have reacted to this very positively. I think central banks, what they will do is to push for more fiscal policy, because if you are at below zero or very close to, you can question the effectiveness of the tools of the central bank. Again, I'm not saying the central bank doesn't have enough tools, but the effectiveness can be questioned. And that's why I think the central banks will ask for more fiscal policy. Now, what you saw in China was, I think, expected by the markets and early in the year, because Chinese New Year this year is coming very early in the year. So that was expected. But of course, there's more room for monetary policy in China. But if you look at the Fed and especially ECB, they will certainly ask for more fiscal policy. The question, though, is do we get a lot in the Eurozone? Is Germany getting away with their black zero policy? I doubt that this is the case. So we expect some fiscal stimulus in the Eurozone, but not a massive one. And that could cause some volatility in 2020. So that's why that's our first theme. That's why we look into this very carefully.
Definitely could provide a potential, disappointment to people, anyone who's hoping for a big fiscal boost there. Christian Nolting, I will come back to you, the global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management. Now, around 400 people were arrested in Hong Kong on New Year's Day after an anti-government rally turned violent, sparking clashes between police and activists. Emily Tan filed this report from Hong Kong.
It's the first day back at work in the new year 2020, and about 200 people gathered for a lunchtime protest in the central business district. Largely peaceful, uneventful, and they dispersed after about 1 hour. This follows a New Year's Day march, which had to be called off 3 hours in because of violence. We had protesters throwing petrol bombs, as well as vandalizing at least 5 HSBC branches and ATMs. You can see behind me one of the bank mascots, Stitch and Steven, which is about 50 meters in front of me. Their eyes painted red alongside their nose, and you can see half of the face of the lion is black, probably charred from the fact that the protesters last night tried to set the lion on fire. HSBC now becoming the latest target of the protesters. This after the bank suspended an account allegedly used to support the protesters. HSBC on their part says that the decision was unrelated to the Hong Kong situation, that the account was used for a different purpose than intended or stated, and they're just adhering to global regulations. In a statement last night, HSBC said that they strongly condemn the acts of vandalism and damage directed at their premises repeatedly in the last few days. And they believe that the rule of law is essential in Hong Kong for its status as an international financial center, and they look forward to the speedy resolution of the issues. Reporting from the Central Business District in Hong Kong, I'm Emily Tang.
Emily Tan on the ongoing Hong Kong protests there. Now stay with us, because coming up on the show, welcomed back with open arms. New details emerge of a warm reception in Beirut for Carlos Ghosn after the auto tycoon's mysterious escape from Japan. We'll discuss that and more in just a few moments.
All the parts that you need to keep her on the road, for work, for school.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds, or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations. You'll also get live commercial-free news, plus live play-by-play games from NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Smart Sports Wagering Talk is now on TuneIn. This is Brett Musburger. The Better Network is now on TuneIn. Search BETR. Be better informed. Be better prepared. And remember, cash and tickets is what it's all about.
You might already know that TuneIn allows you to listen to all the pro sports leagues wherever you go. But did you know TuneIn is also home to the wide world of college sports?
Open three, DeAndre Hunter got it! Handoff Carruthers, big hole right side. He leaps and he surges in, touchdown!
From live college football, basketball, and baseball games to podcasts and coaches shows fueling your love for the game in your school. And the best part is, it's all free. Search college sports to find your team or league.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn. A step back, deep three is up and in. Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Welcome back to the show. Well, Airbus shares are trading near the top of the Stock 600. This after Reuters reported that the company became the world's largest plane maker for the first time since 2011. It delivered 863 jets in 2019, surpassing expectations. Airbus has overtaken its U.S. rival Boeing, which has been hit by the grounding of its 737 MAX plane. Airbus did not comment on the figures, but you can see a very good start to the day. Airbus up 3.5 percentage points, up 60%. In 2019, very strong performance by Airbus. And AMS shares are lower after the chip maker said it had achieved a 59.9% stake in the German lighting company Osram, a story we've been watching very, very closely for the good part of 2019. More than the 55% needed for its takeover, but less than the 75% needed to get access to Osram's profits. The Austrian company said it expects to close a deal for the German firm in the second quarter. And you can see today that both of the relevant stocks are trading slightly underwater. AMS down 2.6%. Let's get back out to Christian Nolting, the global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management. And again, let's go back to your outlook for this year and your 6 big themes. We talked about fiscal spending. You mentioned earlier that you'd still see equity returns of 5 to 7% in 2020. But let's talk about the detail here. Is it time for a rotation, say, out of growth stocks into value stocks?
Yeah, I think since August we have seen some interesting development there. We had a Four Sigma event where really there was a shift, where there was so much into growth, more into value, and we see, I think in the last months, quite a rotation. So what we want to do is to rebalance a little bit, not to completely move out of growth, because I think it's still a long-lasting and also for 2020 relevant theme, but to balance this a little bit makes a lot of sense. So what we're looking for especially is value with predictable cash flows, and I think that could be a very interesting theme in 2020 because the rotation we've been seeing could certainly continue in this year. So I think that's a very important point to look for. The other point in the equity market we want to point out is if you look at the economy, you've seen a lot of development, positive one on the consumer side. And manufacturing has been hit, but the consumer has been very strong, especially in Euroland, but also in the US. So that's another aspect we want to look at. So value growth, really look a little bit more for value, but also on the consumer side, we see some strengths. So that's something to watch out for in this year.
And regional growth as well. To go back to what you're saying about value, how about per asset class? Because if you look at history right now, there are certain European equity markets that trade at a significant discount, say, to fixed income, given some of the valuations that are prevalent in fixed income space, corporate bonds, sovereign bonds. If you were an investor looking at the matrix, would you say that this is a good idea, a good year for you to avoid fixed income instruments, given the relatively rich valuation?
Yeah, valuation is quite toppy, that's for sure. I think what you need to do is to look into your portfolio very carefully and justify any position which is slightly below zero, even far below zero in return. I think that's very important. But of course, you cannot sell everything in fixed income because you need diversification in your portfolio. So what we are saying is you really need to have a look into 2020 and look at strategic asset allocation. Where are you positioned? What's the risk you can take? Diversification will be very, very crucial. And I think if you look at this decade, and you said at the beginning we're starting a new decade, strategic asset allocation is something we really need to discuss with the investors to look into. I think that's very important eventually for performance, and especially after such a nice year, 2019, and if you look at the last 10 years, quite nice returns. So I think that's a key point for this decade, I would say.
And sir, what are you advising clients to do on emerging markets versus developed markets here? Because again, 2019, we saw an outperformance of developed markets versus EM. Does that continue?
Well, I think especially if you look in the fixed income space, emerging markets could still be an interesting place to look, because return-wise, that's something where you can make some return, and especially we prefer Asia. We also look at some pieces in Latin America, but what we look at is also on the corporate side in emerging markets. As we don't forecast a stronger dollar, I think that's a positive sign for emerging markets. Secondly, central banks in emerging markets have more room, of course, to cut rates. So probably if the economy is getting weaker from here, there is more room for them to act, and that's an opportunity. And with that, the corporates in the emerging markets should do quite well. And for us, that's a very interesting theme on the fixed income side. On the equity side, I think we can, as I said, expect something also from the developed markets. So emerging markets for us is more the fixed income side really to gain some performance from.
Excellent. Very clear views there. And then it's also, you raise a very good point in that emerging market central banks do have a little bit more monetary policy ammunition than developed market central banks. Christian Nolting, we'll leave it there, the global CIO of Deutsche Bank Wealth Management. But stay with us, because in just a few moments, we're going to take a look at the UK manufacturing PMI data for December, which will be released when we come back. We'll be right back.
Ready or not.
can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back D3 is up and in.
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
On the goal line, Martin scores and takes it home.
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores.
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot, they score.
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today. You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Smart Sports Wagering Talk is now on TuneIn. This is Brett Musburger. The Better Network is now on TuneIn. Search BETR. Be better informed. Be better prepared. And remember, cash and tickets is what it's all about.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow and tune in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Welcome back to Street Signs. I'm Jemana Bersecci, and these are your headlines. European stocks start a new decade in the green, with all major indices and sectors moving higher after China cut its R again to further boost its slowing economy. Miners outperform after Beijing's easing, while President Trump sets a date for the signing of a Phase 1 trade deal. And Airbus shares soar after Reuters reports the French company has reclaimed its spot as the world's largest plane maker after delivering 863 jets in 2019, surpassing its rival Boeing. Plus, questions mount over Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan, while a lawyer says the ex-Nissan boss will hold a press conference on January the 8th. Well, we had the Eurozone final December manufacturing PMI numbers come half an hour ago, slightly higher than the flash estimates. We're getting the UK equivalent now. Just to bring you those details, the UK final manufacturing print has come in at 47.5. That is a smidge higher than the flash estimate of 47.4. In terms of final manufacturing output, the IHS market number points to 45.6 versus November's number 49.9. That is the lowest since July 2012. So still painting a rather gloomy picture for the manufacturing backdrop here in the UK. That is the picture for the pound, though. We've got it trading north of 131, so has rebounded slightly in the last couple of sessions, but 132.20 is where we're at, trading slightly softer this morning to the tune of 0.25 percentage point. And obviously we had a roller coaster ride in December for the pound, at one point reaching around 135 post the general election and then dropping towards the end of the year to around 130-ish. So here we are stabilizing at around 132.20, and this in light of the slightly weaker manufacturing numbers for the month of December. All right, how about rest of European currencies and other currencies that we're looking at today, starting with euro trading sideways at around 112. Again, not much movement there, but certainly a currency pair that investors will be watching very, very closely, especially if the dollar does weaken this year. 2019 obviously was a very strong year for the US dollar, so all eyes on that currency pair and obviously what that means for the ECB now that their new stimulus package is in place. Dollar yen, we have the dollar trading slightly firmer against the Japanese safe haven currency to the tune of about 0.1 percentage point. We were just talking about sterling now trading on the back foot. How about European markets? Well, a lot of action there this morning and a lot of green on the board. As you can see, every single one of these European markets is trading nicely in positive territory. The first trading day of the year and the decade after a very strong 2019. FTSE 100 up 0.9 percentage point, about 70 points higher today. Xetra DAX in Germany up about 0.6 percentage point. CAC 40 up 1.1. Right at the top there, we've got Airbus. Airbus is leading the gains today on the stock 600, up north of 3%. Now officially the largest plane maker for 2019, having sold the most planes relative to its rival Boeing. No surprise there. And then FTSE MIB, we have also starting off on solid territory, so also up 1%. So very firm start to the year for European bourses. As for U.S. futures, let's see how things are pairing up in the States. So we've got S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ again, all seen opening up in positive territory. S&P 500 seen up about 16 points, Dow up about 150 points. And again, for the year, very, very solid territory with the S&P ending up around 30% stronger for 2019. The Dow about 23% stronger. Can those gains be repeated? Let's see. It's still January the 2nd. There's a lot of this year to get through still. All right, one of the other stories we've been following very, very closely, former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn will hold a press conference in Beirut next Wednesday after he fled Tokyo for his native home of Lebanon. Now, that's according to a lawyer representing Ghosn. He faces a trial in Japan over allegations of financial misconduct, and he has denied wrongdoing and said he, quote, escaped injustice. Lebanese President Michel Aoun met with Ghosn following his arrival in Lebanon. This, according to Reuters. Sources say Aoun warmly greeted the auto tycoon after his flight landed in Beirut, and a media advisor to the president's office denied the report. And Turkey's Interior Ministry has detained several people as part of an investigation into Ghosn's journey into Lebanon. This, according to the Turkish broadcaster NTV. Ghosn reportedly flew to Beirut via Istanbul. Turkish officials said no record of this trip has been found. So the plot thickens as we try to figure out details of how exactly Carlos Ghosn made it out of Japan into Beirut. What was the method? Which passwords did he use? And certainly a story that we've been watching very, very closely the last couple of days. A story of intrigue. All right, well, it is the first day of the trading year, but let's also not forget it's the first day of a new decade. So let's take a look back at how some of the key indices in China performed over the last decade, starting with the Shanghai Composite. You can see that it has been a bit of a bumpy ride there. If you look back at the index over the last 10 years, we saw obviously that huge spike post the stimulus measures enacted after the crisis, and we reached the highs in around late 2014-15. Since then, the Shanghai has come off, but if you look at the performance over the last decade, actually pretty underwhelming, down minus 5.8%. So not what you would imagine, especially after Shanghai having pulled in a performance of north of 20% for 2019. What about Shenzhen Composite? This is the tech-heavy and perhaps higher beta and more volatile index in China, has more tech components in this one. The Shenzhen over the last 10 years up 46%, so decent, obviously positive, but not as much as its DM counterparts if you compare it to the likes of the S&P and Dow, for example. And then finally, let's take a broader look of all emerging markets. This is the picture for MSCI, the EM index at the end of the last decade. And if you trace it back the last 10 years, percentage change, a meager 12.7%. My goodness. So underwhelming if you look at it from a 10-year lens. All right, let's bring in Ian Vitti, portfolio manager of the Global Emerging Markets Fund and Ned Group Investments. Investors looking at emerging markets, if they had a 10-year horizon for their investment plan, would probably be marginally underwhelmed versus placing their money in developed markets. How do you think about your timeline when investing in EM?
Yeah, well, we look at a number of factors. So I think 10 years ago, everybody was talking about how great emerging markets looked. And of course, they turned out to be, the performance got off to a good start as China's stimulus helped the rest of the world. But then it, as you said, there were problems and it didn't perform as well as the S&P in particular or other markets. So 10 years is a bit of an arbitrary time frame. We have a checklist we look at. And at the moment, looking forward for the next couple of years, it is much more positive than it was, say, a year or two ago. But we're not quite banging the table just yet. So we're sort of neutralish now relative to the rest of the world.
So we had, I don't know if you were listening, but a prior guest on the show who was saying that as for emerging markets, he thinks the value is in fixed income rather than in equities going into 2020. And that's because the emerging market central banks still have a little bit of ammunition to cut, whereas obviously we don't have that here in developed markets. Do you share that view? And do you share that the view that if you want to be invested in something right now, it's probably EM bonds?
Yeah, I think for certain countries, EM bonds look quite good, so certain emerging market bonds. I wouldn't say all emerging market bonds. And of course, if interest rates are coming down and the bond markets rally, that usually leads to a rally in equities as well at some point. So I wouldn't disagree, but there are probably exceptions within that, I think, that might be more exciting.
We have talked a lot about China as well in 2019 because of the trade war, and obviously because of its global importance from an economic perspective. Most analysts out there think Chinese growth will moderate to around 6%, maybe just shy of that. Is there a risk that China disappoints to, let's say, growth of 5.5 percentage points? And what does that mean for where you want to put your money this year?
Yeah, I think as we've seen, you've just shown a chart of 10-year equity returns were quite poor, even though the economy did very well. And it became a driver for the global economy when it really needed it. So stock market returns don't always mirror economic growth. So we might get the opposite in the next few years. I think Chinese economic growth probably will be lackluster. We're certainly not going back to 2016 type acceleration. But I think we all worried about China overheating or boom-bust cycle. The Chinese authorities seem to be calming that down. They seem to be less keen on stimulus. The stimulus measures seem quite measured.
So you like China as a play this year then?
I think at the moment it looks very good. I think growth may well disappoint. So we're not getting too bullish throughout the whole year. But at the moment, we've got incremental easing, which they need to do because of as you just said, growth is not that strong. And there's some reforms coming through. We've seen monetary policy reforms, we've seen interest rate reforms, and now we've seen hukou reforms over the last couple of weeks continued. So it's all very gradualist. In the long run, very positive. In the short run, mixed, definitely not gung-ho growth.
All right, Ian, well, you have the fortune of being on our show on the first trading day of the year, and investors are watching thinking, where am I going to put my money? It's January the 2nd. I want to get involved in emerging markets. Where should they go?
Well, in the short term, China A shares do look great still. They've probably got a bit further to run. If you're selective within that, it's a hugely deep market. So there are some very good companies there that I think will cause their competitors some problems. Elsewhere, India's doing some very good reforms. But like China, has a credit crunch in the short term, so in certain selective areas. So maybe we'll get a buying opportunity later in the year for that. Vietnam still looks very good, a big winner out of the trade war, of course. But definitely we've seen some really interesting movements within it, I think. So I would be selective within it, wait for money supply to turn around in China and India, and then get more aggressive.
And many people out there are saying that this year we could actually see a weakening of the US dollar. It's certainly on the president's radar, and he'll have the time to focus on it this year now that the phase 1 trade deal potentially is going to be signed. What does a weaker dollar mean for the emerging market complex? And does that make you more likely to be wanting to be invested in local markets here, so the local EM currency as opposed to hard currency?
Definitely. A strong dollar has been a headwind for emerging markets in liquidity as well as in other factors. But going forward, if the dollar is going to be weaker, which it looks like it's rolling over, that'll be a tailwind for emerging markets. So it's one of those items on our checklist we look for.
All right, Ian, we'll leave it there. A nice little discussion of emerging markets going into this year. Ian Beattie, Portfolio Manager from the Global Emerging Markets Fund at Ned Group Investments. Now, tensions between Iran and the U.S. have been escalating over attacks on the American embassy in Baghdad. Leaders from both countries weighed in amid developments on the ground. NBC's Hans Nichols has the latest.
For a second day, violent demonstrations at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. U.S. forces firing tear gas as protesters set tires on fire and tried to scale the compound's walls while Iraqi security forces stand guard. But late today, the Iranian-backed demonstrators packing up and dispersing after their militia leaders ordered a retreat. President Trump sending 750 troops from the 82nd Airborne to the region to counter the Iranian threat after 100 Marines arrived within hours of the siege.
We had some great warriors come in and do a fantastic job, and they were there instantaneously as soon as we heard this will never, ever be a Benghazi.
In Iraq, no demonstrators made it inside the walls of the massive embassy complex. President Trump blames the attack on Iran, saying he would hold them responsible. But today, the country's top religious leader hitting back on Twitter. You can't do anything. All part of a tense standoff with Iran, with Iranian-backed forces repeatedly targeting U.S. troops in the region, including an attack on Americans last Friday, which prompted a U.S. strike on an Iranian-backed militia this week. Last night, the president was asked about the prospects of war.
I don't think that would be a good idea for Iran. It wouldn't last very long. Do I want to? No. I want to have peace. I like peace.
Certainly developments we're watching very closely there in the Middle East. Well, if you want to get involved in the conversation, you can tweet us at Twitter, at Street Science CNBC, or tweet us directly at CNBC Jou. We've certainly discussed a lot on the show, whether it's the PMI numbers or the outlook for 2020. Get involved in the conversation. We want to hear from you. And stay with us, because in just a couple of minutes' time, we're going to be talking climate change in 2020. Our next guest will talk about regulation, technology, and market risk for this year. Stay with us.
Selling a home is expensive and stressful, so we set out to create a better home selling experience.
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night, and somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here, testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use, and the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
You might already know that TuneIn allows you to listen to all the pro sports leagues wherever you go. But did you know TuneIn is also home to the wide world of college sports?
Open three, DeAndre Hunter got it! Handoff Carruthers, big hole right side. He leaps and he surges in. Touchdown!
From live college football, basketball, and baseball games to podcasts and coaches shows fueling your love for the game in your school. And the best part is, it's all free. Search college sports to find your team or league.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit tunein.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three, it's up and in!
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Be better informed, be better prepared. The Better Network is on TuneIn. This is Brent Musburger. Search BETR and start hanging out with me and my guys in the desert weekday afternoons. The Better Network is now on TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Welcome back to Street Signs. The NBA's longest-serving commissioner, David Stern, has died at the age of 77 after suffering a brain hemorrhage. During his 30 years in charge of the world's most popular basketball league, Stern transformed the NBA into a global brand, broadcasting in over 200 countries. He was able to multiply revenue by over 30 times to a reported $5 billion after teams had been struggling to make profit prior to the former lawyer's appointment in 1984. And raging wildfires in Australia have continued to cause mass-scale evacuation as residents and vacationers have been urged to leave the region as fire conditions worsen. The military has now intervened to rescue thousands still trapped by the blazes. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
Under blood-red skies and choking smoke, an apocalyptic scene of never-ending fire. Jeff, put the blanket up. In one coastal town, 4,000 people who fled to the beach and boats have been allowed to return home. But across Australia, at least 17 are known dead, 1,000 homes destroyed.
All of my possessions have been totally incinerated.
Trapped and disoriented, Australia's most iconic animals.
If we didn't get him down from the tree, then he would have been up there amongst the flames.
This koala, named Lewis, did not survive his burns. Without enough firefighters, zookeeper Chad Staples and his staff are working round the clock to keep his 200 animals safe.
By 11 o'clock or 11:30, it was black like midnight, just that smoke. Then that horrible red, tinge to the sky that the fire creates in the heat. It was horrendous.
Environmental experts say 30% of wild koalas in New South Wales may have died, 8,500. And as Chad told us recently, urban sprawl has made the koala an endangered species.
To be blunt, it's basically habitat destruction.
That's threatening their existence.
Absolutely.
The fear, koalas may soon disappear from the wild.
And we will eventually have no wild koalas in the wild. You'll have to go to a zoo.
You think that's a real possibility?
I do think that is a wild possibility.
Tonight, as Australia struggles with an unprecedented disaster, its beloved koalas are also in extreme danger. Tom Costello, NBC News.
Meanwhile, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is vowing to do, quote, everything humanly possible to fight climate change. In her New Year's address, Merkel urged German residents to make adjustments to their lifestyle, calling global warming real and dangerous. Last month, Germany's upper house of parliament approved a higher levy on carbon pollution, but critics say it is still too low. And the EU is stepping up regulatory efforts in a bid to combat the effects of climate change. 3 key targets have been set for 2020. They include 1, cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 20%, 2, getting 20% of the bloc's energy from renewables, and 3, 20% improvement in energy efficiency. So 3 20% goals there out of the EU. Let's bring in Stephen Nell, the Director of Energy-Wide Perspectives at IHS Markit, who joins us. So let's start actually with the EU, because obviously that's been a big talking point and a big focus from a political perspective this year. Even in Germany, the Green Party is actually the biggest party now. And we hear from Chancellor Angela Merkel saying, look, this needs to be a priority. Ursula von der Leyen, the new European Commission president back in December, has spelled out some of the priorities for the EU, the Green New Deal, over the next year and obviously the next 20, 30 years as well. How tangible is the, obviously these are very ambitious targets, but, is there any detail to which we can actually latch on to in the sense that things are moving in the right direction and we will get pragmatic solutions now rather than just talk?
Well, 2019 was certainly a memorable year in terms of the social mobilization that we saw in support of more aggressive climate change action and some of the most aggressive climate policy targets yet conceived. And at the national level across the European Union, as well as at the federal level, there's clear evidence that The approach to climate change needs to intensify, and the EU is actually notable in that the blueprint that they've laid out in support of the longer-term vision for a net zero emissions position by 2050, which is a real step change from the level of ambition that we've seen even from the European Union through 2020. It's going to be substantiated by some new codification of what types of investments may be a sustainable and supportive practice. So the EU's gone a little bit farther than most when it comes to how we would realize that target, and at the same time, that new codification is quite notable for what it excludes as well as what has been included at this initial phase.
Expound on that. What exactly do you mean? What are they excluding?
Well, discussions around sustainable finance have struggled in part because sustainability means so many different things to so many different markets and different countries. So in the context of the European Union, they've been quite explicit about the lack of sustainability credentials that investments in, say, solid fuels and coal specifically now garner. Notable that investments in nuclear and natural gas were deemed to be more of a transitional type of investment opportunity, so with some sustainability credentials that really reinforce what the European Union's tried to do, but also reflecting the fact that nuclear and natural gas have opportunities to reduce emissions intensity compared to coal. Also quite notable that oil was not really included in that initial codification, leaving investors in oil and gas companies with a measure of relief, at least in the first instance.
Sensitive topic. And obviously this is being pushed forward by governments, but we're also hearing central banks get a lot more vocal on this front as well. Only a couple of days ago, the Bank of England, the outgoing Bank of England Governor, Mark Carney, gave an interview to the BBC, and he was warning that the policies of companies are consistent with degree warming of something of around 3.7 to 3.8 degrees Celsius if nothing is done. I mean, these are really scary numbers to be looking at over the next 50 years or so. What role do you think central banks should be playing in coordinating this move towards sustainable investment?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we see a huge amount of corporate engagement on climate change. And again, thinking about the currents that are going to frame the outlook for 2020, although the politics of climate change may be below some of the levels in some markets that, say, the activist community would seek, there's been a really, really big push on the part of shareholders to drive companies towards more sustainable practices. And certainly at IHS Markit, we see a great deal of engagement from the board level on down to driving towards more sustainable outcomes. That's in part a reflection of the reality that the Bank of England, under the stewardship of Governor Carney, has directed through the form of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We have a new language to discuss climate-related risks. It's one that we've seen companies really take on board in their strategies, in their disclosures around emissions. And I would suggest that the role of central banks and institutional authorities continues to be quite prominent as part of a collaborative effort to address climate change.
And of course, it all needs to be streamlined. I've got to ask you, whenever I talk about climate change, even off air, when I discuss it with my friends, the pushback is always the same. It's like, well, Europe can do as much as it wants, but at the end of the day, the biggest offenders is still China and India. So where does that leave the world if China and India are not carrying their own weight as well in terms of this push towards more sustainable?
Well, I think that's fair. Certainly, China emits twice as much as the next economy and will be absolutely critical in shaping the pathway towards the realization of the Paris Agreement. We, in part, as consumers that import goods from China, have a role to play because a lot of those emissions are in export industries that help support our lifestyles in markets such as the United Kingdom. So we need perhaps a slightly different accounting framework to realize a level playing field, which perhaps a more appropriate response to climate change would be built upon. But we're really encouraged by what we're seeing in China. And going into 2020, one of the big regulatory signposts that we're watching is the new 5-year plan that will cover the development of the Chinese economy from 2021 to 2025. There's every opportunity through a combination of market reforms, some mandates, but also the introduction of the largest carbon market the world has yet known, that Chinese emissions could peak rather sooner than the current target, which is for 2030.
Certainly something to keep a close eye on. I'd love to continue the conversation. We're running out of time. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me on Street Science. Stephen Nall, the Director of Energy-Wide Perspectives at IHS Markit. But that is it for our first show of the year and the decade. I'm Joanna Versace. Worldwide Exchange is coming up next. Stay with the channel.
There you go. Slow slicing fruits, veggies, and those stinky onions that... Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Cutting for the net, scores! On the goal line, Marchand scores!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Hello, I'm Nat Coombs from ESPN's The Nat Coombs Show, which admittedly is 1 out of 10 for original podcast name, but 10 out of 10 for NFL chat. Every week, we're dropping 4 episodes with an all-pro lineup of terrific guests, journalists, comedians, players, coaches, you name it, all getting you up to speed with everything gridiron. The Nat Coombs Show, American football, British accent. Add to your favorites and listen on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations. You'll also get live commercial-free news, plus live play-by-play games from NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Want TuneIn to remind you when the big NFL game is about to get underway? Be sure notifications are allowed on your phone and search NFL on the TuneIn app. Find the game you want to hear under events and tap Notify Me. We'll let you know exactly when it's time to listen in for kickoff.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down.
Get your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back deep three is up and in.
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
5 a.m. at CNBC Global Headquarters, and here is your 5 at 5. It is a decade of records in the books, but what can investors hope for in the new year? On the run, new details around ousted Nissan chief Carl Ghosn's escape to Lebanon. Save the date. President Trump says he has a phase 1 signing ceremony on the calendar, but still few details. Streaming superstorm. New numbers on how much the U.S. is streaming compared to just 10 years ago. And no Buffett bailout here. The deal of the decade that the Oracle of Omaha gave a pass to. All his worldwide exchange begins right now. To the first trading day of the new decade. Here's how stock futures are looking to kick off 2020. And we are seeing some upside. Remember, this will be a slow trading week, though low volume is what we've seen for most of the week. But we are getting ready for, as of now, a slightly positive open from all 3 of the major indexes, of course, closing out a record year. The S&P and NASDAQ coming off their best annual gains since 2013, locking in 28.8% for the S&P 500 and NASDAQ, its best year since 2013, up 35% year for the year. Now, top stocks for the S&P in 2019, that would be AMD, up more than 148%, and Lam Research, up more than 113%. So those SMEs doing very, very well. Let's get a check on the bond market as well. The 10-year currently trading at 1.937%. And, it wasn't just a good year here. It was a great year for global markets. So let's go worldwide now. And our own Yomana Bersetchi is standing by in London with a recap of the global markets. Yomana, first day of trading there as well. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you, Deirdre. So the roaring 20s are off to a roaring start, I could say, for global markets. Let's take your attention, though, to Asian markets. We'll start there in chronological order. A couple of catalysts to be aware of overnight. Number one, the China PBOC have announced that they are cutting the RRR rate by another 50 basis points on January the 6th. Very positive catalyst for markets. It releases up to around 800 billion worth of renminbi. So extra liquidity being pumped into the system. Very positive for Chinese markets. You can see overnight Shanghai Composite up 1.1%, and the Shenzhen, the slightly more tech-heavy index, up about 1.9%. Looking back at last year, Shanghai ended up at 23% higher for the year, roughly just shy of that for the year of 2019. Shenzhen up about 35%. So really very strong gains in these Chinese indices. And of course, a lot of focus on the trade war. And of course, it has emerged in the last couple of days that there will be a signing ceremony to take place on January 15th. Another positive catalyst for Asian markets overnight. So definitely starting off on the right foot. We've also got the Hang Seng Index up 1.25 percentage points. This market in Hong Kong has been under a lot of scrutiny, clearly because of the Hong Kong demonstrations, and those continued over New Year's Eve. And some demonstrators have actually been arrested, but we are seeing a strong start to the year in Hong Kong as well. What about Europe? Let me take your attention to some of the majors in Europe too. Very strong year for the Stock 600, as we spoke about a couple of days ago. The Stock 600 ended the year up about 23%. So pretty much similar gains to what we had in the Shanghai Composite. The UK FTSE 100 up about 75 points today, 1 percentage point firmer. Some of the miners in the UK index, like Antofagasta, Glencore, those names are reacting quite well on the positive China news. So they're leading the gains there. Xetra DAX in Germany up about 0.8 percentage points, and the CAC 40 in France up 1.3%. One of the big gainers on the CAC 40 is Airbus. Airbus is up about 3.25 percentage points today, having now being formally announced the largest plane maker of the year of 2019. Then we have the Italian index up 1.2%. One thing I should just add, we also had the final Eurozone PMI manufacturing numbers this morning. Came in slightly higher than expectations for the aggregate, much weaker for Italy, better for France, and better for Germany. But it's still very, very early days. We're only about 1 hour into the trading session of what is going to be a very, very long year, Deirdre.
Silly, just at the start, and certainly over here, investors are going to be looking at U.S.-China relations still. On that note, President Trump says he will sign a U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal in a White House ceremony on January 15th. Though details of the reported 86-page agreement, those remain scant. The president also says he's planning to travel to China for Phase 2 talks in the coming months. Now, Eunice, if there was ever a story of 2019 to bleed into 2020, this would be it. And how great that we have you actually here in person for the start of the new year.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, no, it's definitely going to continue to dog the markets into 2020 for sure, just because of all the uncertainty. Even in China right now, state media hasn't made a peep or any type of confirmation that there is going to be a signing on January 15th. So that's something obviously to watch. But also what people are watching is what's happening with the economy. Overnight, we had more economic data disappointing for December. This was the Caixin PMI, which you well know is a survey for private, smaller companies. And it showed that it wasn't really good. 51.5 versus 51.8 in the previous month. So this is the weakest reading in 3 months. Also, the new orders are dropping. And what people are looking for now is how the economy is going to shape up for 2019 on January 17th when the GDP number for the full year is released. Expected to show a further slowdown and really underscoring the fragility of the economy and the reason why the authorities there are now making the stabilizing the growth a priority for 2020. So there are a lot of reasons for that because they do see the slowdown, but also because next year, 2021, is another important marker for China. It is the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, and And a long time ago, China made a promise that they were going to double the GDP from 2010 in 2020. And they made a big deal about that in the state press in the run-up in the past several weeks, but also President Xi in his New Year's address also said it once again. So the expectation now is that the government is going to really want to stabilize growth, especially when it has all these other geopolitical issues on their plate. And so they want to make sure that at least they got the economy down, which is another reason why there's a big belief in Beijing that China does want this truce, does want the trade deal to go on. So even though we haven't really heard a whole lot, that the expectation is that they will want this signing.
Right, that intention is likely there. And we're heading into the Chinese New Year, right? What is sentiment on the ground in terms of as well, like consumer spending? That's going to be an important theme here and there with all the trade tensions going on.
Well, the spending is still there. I mean, you know, it's one of these things you have to. It's like Christmas or something. You have to buy things. You have to eat a lot of pork during the holidays. So there's still a lot of spending that's going to go on. But even before I left, when I was coming here, the cash crunch and the discussion about the cash crunch is really big right now. And so we saw moves from the central bank saying that they're going to inject liquidity, make things a little bit easier for people, which usually happens around this time of year. And then the other story that was pretty interesting in terms of geopolitics is I don't know if you saw this one in Reuters. They were reporting that China is going to halt the stock connect with London, and that there have been a lot of discussions about maybe that's going to happen because of, again, geopolitical issues on the rise.
Right, absolutely. Eunice, thank you. And few people know this. We were in Beijing at the same time, living in the same complex. Yeah. So it is so nice to see you all these years later. It's great to see you. On this side of the world. Eunice, thank you so much for that. Let's take a look now at some of the other top stories that we are following, and Rahel Solomon is here with that. Good morning and Happy New Year, Rahel.
Happy New Year, Dee. So let's stay overseas now. Hundreds of people were arrested as Hong Kong protesters rallied on New Year's Day and into the night. As police used a water cannon to try to break up the demonstrations, hundreds of anti-government demonstrators were arrested. In all, police said they made 400 arrests on New Year's Day. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will lead the White House delegation at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland later this month. He will be joined by Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and Trade Rep Robert Lighthizer, among others. Back in December, you might remember that it was reported President Trump was also planning to attend the gathering after he scrapped plans for last year's event. And Apple is striking a deal with UK chip designer Imagination Technologies. The licensing agreement revives a business relationship that Apple had sidelined back in 2017. So this deal will give Apple access to a pretty wide range of Imagination's IP, but no details on the size of that deal. Deidre, I'll send it back to you.
Rahel, thanks for that. And when we come back from the break, on the lam, new details around ousted Nissan chiefs escape halfway across the world. Then the wage wars hit Seattle. Kate Rogers hits Main Street with what business owners are saying. And later,
This CNBC program is sponsored by...
Oh, a decent drill would make DIY so much easier.
Whether you're laying flooring or fitting shelves, head to the B&Q Tool Shop. Get hands-on in-store with our wide range of drills, including the Bosch Universal Impact Combi Drill for just £80. The B&Q Tool Shop. You can do it when you B&Q it.
Cutting for the net, scores! On the goal line, Marchand scores!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations. You'll also get live commercial-free news, plus live play-by-play games from NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. with live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. It's a new year and time for you to explore new podcasts on TuneIn. Exciting new podcasts like How I Built This from NPR.
A show about innovators, entrepreneurs, idealists, stories behind the movements. Go.
The Rachel Maddow Show from MSNBC.
Good evening. Thanks for being with us. Happy holidays. Congressman.
What's Next from Slate. Start your new year with these podcasts and more. Just search podcasts on TuneIn.
More than 4,000% over the last 10 years. The big question, of course, can it repeat that kind of performance or anywhere near it? Likely not that performance, of course, facing tons of competition. We're going to be talking about Disney Plus later on in the show. Moving on, new details are emerging today over how former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn managed to skip bail in Japan and escape to Lebanon. Rahel.
This is a story that has so much intrigue and so many people are interested in it.
What a way to kick off the year with this kind of mystery and, I mean, potentially involving
It's like something out of a movie.
Case.
I know. So we'll get to that. But apparently we're learning that the plan to slip Carlos Ghosn out of Japan was reportedly hatched over a period of about 3 months. So sources say that he was smuggled out of house arrest in Tokyo by a private security company. They shuttled him out of the country on a private jet, first to Istanbul and then on to Beirut. The pilot was reportedly unaware of Ghosn's presence on board. Sources say that Ghosn is currently staying at the helm of one of his wife's relatives. And when contacted by Reuters, Carol Ghosn, she declined to provide any details of his escape. However, Deirdre, she did dismiss reports by Lebanese media that he got away in a large musical box for instruments following a private concert at his Tokyo residence. Reuters also reporting that Ghosn was greeted by Lebanon's president on Monday, Ghosn thanking him for his support while he was in detention in Japan. Reports say that Lebanon had pressed for Ghosn's return about a week before he escaped. Lebanese officials say there's no need to take legal measures because Ghosn entered the country legally with a French passport, even though his lawyers in Japan are holding his 3 other passports. Lebanon has no extradition agreement with Japan, and an attorney says that Ghosn plans to hold a press conference on January 8th. So, Deirdre, you and I talked about this last week. How could he get out of the country? Apparently, he had 4 passports, 2 French, 1 Lebanese, 1 Brazilian. He was allowed to keep one of those passports as a condition of his bail. It was supposed to be held in a safe. Clearly, he had access to it. And that's part of the reason people suspect that he was able to get away.
And I think this is a story that is far from over, right? He has said that he is going to be defending himself and talking to media in the weeks ahead. So the focus certainly is going to shift to the Japanese legal system, how in the world he could have gotten out, why he was allowed to keep one of his passports, and really could raise some questions and potentially be an embarrassment to the system there.
I mean, I definitely think it's a black eye for the Japanese legal system, right? But it also depends on who you're asking, because last week we heard Carlos Ghosn say through one of his lawyers that he wasn't escaping injustice, he was escaping a rigged justice system in Japan. Mm-hmm. So I guess depending on who you ask, it's either...
Yeah, there's a good journal. There's a good journal editorial this morning, though, seemingly siding with Ghosn, saying that the evidence was murky, and Japan doesn't have good corporate transparency. Yeah. So we'll see how this all shakes out. Thank you very much, Rahel, for that. A busy year shaping up for Washington as new funding members make it into the CNBC newsroom. Plus, Seattle has been at the forefront.
Today's big number. $976,308,000,000. That's how much the market caps of Apple and Microsoft grew collectively in the past year. The two companies accounted for 15% of the S&P's total gain in 2019.
Whether you've enjoyed the legendary terrain and Telluride.
Welcome to Nuffield Health Ealing, a gym built around you. You get regular health MOTs to create a plan that works for you, with physios and personal trainers on site. You'll find a pool and techno gym equipment, and our expert team will help you get the most out of your health, fitness, and your membership. Join today to get the rest of the month free. Search Nuffield Health. Specialists in you. 12-month commitments only. Facilities stated are in most gyms. Visit nuffieldhealth.com/terms.
Missing those moments at family meals?
Who's up for seconds?
Oh, yes, please.
Filter out background noise and turn up the things you love for less, with up to 15% off Boots Hearing Care's best-selling hearing aids. Plus, spread the cost with interest-free monthly payments. Boots, let's feel good. Offer ends 31st of January 2020. Interest-free is subject to status. Over 18s only. Terms and conditions apply. Phonak Marvel hearing aids only.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, plunges into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Back, you're looking at a live shot of Rockefeller Center, excuse me. Seattle has been at the forefront of progressive minimum wage increases, phasing in a $15 an hour minimum wage for all employers by 2021. Now, the impacts of the change have been wide-ranging, and Seattle has given proponents of both sides of the issue evidence of pros and cons to hiking wages. What's happened in the wake of the increase is not so clear-cut. Kate Rogers went to Seattle. She got on the ground to find out more.
Seattle's minimum wage hikes made Chad McKay reevaluate his business model altogether. McKay has long paid above minimum wage in the front and back of house due to competition for talent in the Seattle market. But higher wages pressure businesses to increase further to compete.
We projected out the minimum wage increases, the loss of what would be considered a tip credit, realized that we'd be functionally bankrupt if you fast forwarded 7 years.
But instead of closing his doors, the CEO of Fire and Vine Hospitality nearly doubled in size, thanks to moving to a commission model, adding a 20% service charge for diners and paying his servers a commission based on sales. Today, the company has 600 employees and 12 locations. Front-of-house servers in Seattle can now pull in $70 or more an hour. Dishwashers make between $17 and $20 an hour.
Once we went to that model, I have never worried about minimum wage since. And I'm not sure there's a restaurateur in Washington State or in California or in New York that can say that. We left behind minimum wage as an issue for our company.
Eric Tanaka, partner at Tom Douglas Seattle Kitchen, says he's getting creative as the company looks to the future in the face of labor pressures and regulations like scheduling and paid leave. There's also a talent crunch being felt in varying ways across the group's 13 concepts, despite offering pay above the minimum wage.
It looks like for our company, we are definitely looking at models of restaurants that take less labor. It's hard because we're a scratch house, so it's hard to be handmade without the hands. We've had to re-engineer some of our menus so that they're smaller and less prep intensive.
Seattle's economy has been growing for years. Since 2015, the number of restaurants is up 5%, with annual sales increasing 20% over the same period. And in that time, Seattle's job growth has outpaced the state of Washington as a whole, but growth in weekly hours was slightly lower than the state's average. The city's population has increased by 13%, but so too has homelessness by 11%. For some workers, the wage hikes have been life-changing. When Martin Johnson first arrived in Seattle in 2015, he was camping along Lake Washington. Today, he works 3 minimum wage jobs: as a temporary cook working at the city's stadiums on game days, as a janitor at Costco, and as a handyman in his own business. Johnson, who advocated for higher pay at minimum wage jobs, now rents a monthly room outside of the city in Kent. An improvement, but living in the city is out of reach.
I mean, when you're down here, instead of being paid $9 an hour, you're getting $15 an hour to do the same work. You feel better about yourself. You feel appreciated. You're getting paid more. That way you can take care of your family more.
Beyond Seattle, the federal minimum wage still stands at $7.25 an hour, where it's been since 2009, despite efforts from congressional Democrats to hike pay to $15 an hour nationally. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that such a move could boost pay for as many as 27 million low-wage workers, but could also cause 1.3 million people to lose their jobs.
This is such a fantastic package, Kate. And I mean, I've been going to Seattle for years to cover Amazon. You see the effect that that company has had on the city. Property prices. Interesting. You talked to that gentleman who couldn't afford to live in the city. What are your thoughts if this was expanded nationally? I mean, as we were talking about, Washington's economy is doing so well, but it's not like that everywhere else.
It's such an interesting experiment, right? So Seattle is among the first places to do this. You see it in San Francisco, New York now, Washington, D.C. These are all really very expensive, very high cost of living areas for people. So we don't quite know what a $15 an hour wage would look like in the middle of the country where things aren't necessarily as expensive. And that's why even the CBO report is kind of mixed, right? It would give many, many millions of low-wage workers a big pay boost, but it could also reduce jobs. And a lot of the economic research in Seattle is also mixed. Some reports basically saw workers' pay increase if they were already working minimum wage jobs, but saw some hours cut. Others didn't see any negative impact. So we're still early on in this big experiment, but that's why so many people look to Seattle, because they were at the forefront.
Right, and that's why it's so important that you're doing this. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series.
Thank you so much.
Kate, thanks for that. Straight ahead, details on Big Pharma's plans to raise list prices on more than 200 drugs in the U.S., plus how Tesla is kicking off the new year on a bullish foot. Worldwide Exchange is back right after this.
Do you have concerns about mild memory loss related to aging?
The Grand DFS sale featuring Wallace.
Hello?
And Gromit.
Well, say hello, lad.
Every sofa is made to order.
By a speedy Sofa-matic machine.
By hand.
Oh, suit yourself.
So you can have your sofa exactly how you want it.
Made of cheese?
Not that exactly.
Oh, probably a good thing, eh, Gromit? It'd be gone in a jiffy.
The Grand DFS sale is now on.
How about a cushion made of cheese? Or a footstool?
TuneIn is remembering the biggest college sports moments of the decade, like this one from 2018, when Texas kicker Cameron Dicker nails the game-winning field goal in the Red River Showdown against Oklahoma.
A 40-yard field goal try. Good snap and hold. The kick on its way, and the kick is good! It's good! Dicker, the kicker, comes through, and with 9 seconds...
Search college sports on TuneIn to be there for the moments that go down in history. Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds, or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Hello, I'm Nat Coombs from ESPN's The Nat Coombs Show, which admittedly is 1 out of 10 for original podcast name, but 10 out of 10 for NFL chat. Every week, we're dropping 4 episodes with an all-pro lineup of terrific guests, journalists, comedians, players, coaches, you name it, all getting you up to speed with everything gridiron. The Nat Coombs Show, American football, British accent. Add to your favorites and listen on TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down. Catch your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back D3 is up and in.
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Welcome back. Futures set to surge to kick off the new year. The Dow set to open some 166 points higher if the indication holds. The S&P set to pop nearly 18 points. The NASDAQ set to open 66 points higher. Now, 2019 may have been a year of records for Wall Street, but when we come back, we're talking about some of the world's top money managers. They're not convinced that 2020 will be more of the same. Worldwide Exchange is back right after this.
I love the new MyWW program because it's...
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
On the goal line, scores! He takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
The action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot,
from regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. Listen now to ESPN Daily on TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught, it is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Welcome back. Investors are set to kick off a new year and new decade of trading, looking to build on 2019's record gains. The Trump administration prepares to unveil a new crackdown on vaping, taping aim at popular flavored cartridges. And thanks, but no thanks. New details on Warren Buffett's decision to turn down the chance to buy Tiffany's as the second half of Worldwide Exchange starts right now. I'm Deirdre Boza. I'm in for Brian Sullivan. Let's get a check on this morning's headlines outside of the world of business. NBC's Francis Rivera is in New York with the latest. Good morning and Happy New Year, Francis.
Happy New Year to you, Deirdre. All right, we start this morning remembering an all-time Yankees legend. Former pitcher Don Larson has died after a battle with cancer. He was 90 years old. Throughout his storied career, he played for 7 different teams but made history with the Yankees. He pitched the first and only World Series no-hitter and perfect game in 1956. The Yanks went on to win the World Series, and Larson took MVP honors. He won another ring with New York in 1958 and was later shuffled around the league, playing with the A's, the White Sox, and eventually the Orioles. And more sad news from the world of sports. Former NBA Commissioner David Stern has died following a brain hemorrhage. Officials say Stern, who held the title of commissioner for 30 years, is credited for transforming the league. Under his tenure, the league added 7 new teams, and he helped launch the WNBA. David Stern was 77. After 2 days of violent protests, the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad is secure once again. Troops had to use tear gas before thousands of pro-Iranian demonstrators dispersed under orders from militia leaders. There were no reports of any serious injuries in that assault. Deirdre, those are your headlines on this second day of January, and hopefully on the 3rd you'll get your voice back.
I'm crossing my fingers, and I promise this isn't from partying on New Year's. This is
a disclaimer right there.
Yeah, I had to put it somewhere in the show, so thank you for asking, acknowledging that, Francis. I hope it comes back too. Thank you. Let's take a look at how stock futures are looking halfway through the 5 a.m. hour. Looks like they are set to surge to close out a record 2019 and kick off the new year. The S&P 500 looking to open, if these implied numbers stick, nearly 20 points in the Dow, surging 100 Dow futures surging 166 points again if this holds, and the Nasdaq still below that 9,000 mark that it hit last week. Now the S&P and Nasdaq, as I mentioned, coming off their best annual gain since 2013, locking in 28.4% for the S&P and 38.3% gains for the Nasdaq. Top stocks for the S&P in 2019. AMD up more than 148%. Lam Research up more than 113%. Certainly the semis were a big theme. Taking a look at the bond market, the 10-year yield trading at 1.928%. And let's take a look at how Asian markets wrapped up the day. Their first of the new year. Japan had the day off, but it's coming off strong gains from last year of 18%. South Korea ended its day in negative territory. Meanwhile, Hong Kong and Shanghai both saw gains of more than 1%. Let's also take a look at what's happening in the early trade in Europe. As you can see, European markets also starting the year off on a strong foot. The FTSE 100 up 1%. France CAC up 1.33%. Let's also get a look at some of the other top stories that we're following. And Rahul Solomon is back again with that. Rahul.
Hi, Deirdre. So Tesla is saying that it's set to deliver a second round of China-made Model 3 sedans to its customers. The company tells Reuters that the delivery will happen on Tuesday at an event at its Shanghai factory. It also adds that these customers are not Tesla employees, unlike those who received the first round of Model 3s from that plant. The Trump administration is set to announce a ban on flavored e-cigarette cartridges. White House officials telling CNBC that menthol and tobacco flavors, as well as flavored liquid nicotine products, will be exempt from that ban. President Trump is expected to formally make the announcement tomorrow, so watch for that. And Big Pharma has rung in the new year by raising prices on more than 250 drugs in the U.S. According to Reuters, companies including Bristol Myers Squibb, Gilead Sciences, and Biogen are among those making the hikes. It adds that nearly all of the price increases are below 10%, and apparently that is under pressure from politicians. Deirdre, as you know, that has been a very hot-button issue. I'll send it back to you.
Rahul, thanks for that. President Trump looking ahead to a Phase 2 trade deal with China as he prepares to sign the Phase 1 agreement. The president says he will sign that Phase 1 deal at a White House ceremony on January 15th with, as he says, high-level representatives of China. President Trump adds he will travel to Beijing at a later date to begin talks on the next phase of the trade deal. According to reports, he may use the trip to push for more concessions from China. Wall Street looks poised to keep the record-setting gains of 2019 rolling into 2020, at least at first. Futures are in positive territory ahead of the first trading day of the new year after a banner decade for investors. From 2010 to 2019, the Dow rose more than 173%, while the S&P was up nearly 190%. The Nasdaq, though, and those tech names, they were the big winners, climbing 295% over the last 10 years. Now, the best performing stock over that time, that would be Netflix, rising more than 4,000%. But looking ahead, a number of top money managers on our air offering mixed outlooks for the year ahead and beyond when it comes to the markets and the chances of a recession.
The peak happens typically about 4 to 6 months before the recession starts. So I would say that, sometime in the latter half of 2020.
Absent a policy mistake, it's very hard to see a recession this year and next year.
Let's say prior to the next election, there's probably a 40% chance of a recession.
It seems that there is an increasing probability of recession before the 2020 election. The odds are against a recession occurring before the end of 2020.
If Elizabeth Warren is elected president, in my opinion, market drops 25%. Bernie Sanders, same thing.
Joining me now, Joseph Trevisani, Senior Market Analyst at FX Street. Joe, good morning. Happy New Year, and thanks for being here this morning.
Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, I think you are our first outside guest of 2020
First official guest of 2020.
Exactly.
I am honored. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So you just heard that all those sound bites, really no real consensus there. A lot of different views all over the place. What are you seeing in terms of recession risk as we head into this year?
Well, the recession risk, I'd say two things about it. One, it has certainly gone down considerably. One of the two major concerns, we've said this many times, running from the past year have been political concerns. The trade deal with China, the trade dispute with China, and the possibility of a difficult exit of Britain from the UK. Both of those have pretty much not quite vanished, but diminished tremendously. So the concerns that have inhibited business spending and expansion based on whether or not these two problems will come to fruition should diminish. So you will see a return in business spending because this is no longer a concern. That will bolster an already, at least in the United States, an already strong consumer economy. In addition, even the areas such as Europe that have been endemically growing slowly, will be buoyed if the U.S. and China take off from this trade deal, which is not a guarantee, but it certainly is an increased possibility. So I don't really see any chance for a recession.
You seem very confident that, as you say, these risks have diminished,
They have.
but we've sort of been here before, and there's a good chance that they could rear their ugly heads again. I mean, phase one, we don't even know all the details from it. Phase two.
This is true.
So there's also the election, right? This is an election year in the U.S.
Correct.
upcoming in November. So how are you factoring that in and the risk there?
Well, the election depends pretty much on the Democratic candidate and the proposals and the policies that they choose to put forth as part of the campaign. We're not going to know who the Democratic candidate is going to be probably until the summer during the convention, because it does not seem that anyone is really running away with this. As far as Donald Trump goes, we already know what we're getting and what we have. His policies have been played out for us for the last 3 years. So I don't think there's any mystery there. I don't really see the election unless there's an unusual development, and it's always possible. Some of the Democratic candidates certainly have policies, or at least they've said they do, that would not be received well by various markets around the world, certainly by the stock market.
So if risks are diminishing, and I think Wall Street is predicting certainly not the year that we've had, but a solid year seems to be consensus. What's actually going to drive those gains? And we've talked about trade, we've talked about the election, we've talked about Brexit, but the fundamentals, earnings growth, where's that going to come from?
Well, I see two things happening. One, there has been a psychological drag from both of these difficulties, these considerations, Brexit and trade, that will be diminished. So we have something returning as far as vim and verve, if you want, in the economy. What I'm looking for would be increased growth. I mean, we've been the past 3 quarters, if you include this quarter now, or the fourth quarter that just passed, been growing about 2% here in the United States. If you get that to 2, to 6, to 7, up towards 3%, that is enough energy in the economy to drive sectors such as consumers. I would anticipate also energy sectors and things, commodities that will be priced higher because of increased use. And that's certainly true from China, which is which is the biggest consumer of most commodities in the world. They were growing 6%. They would prefer to grow 7 or 8%. So I think you have room there.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
Coming up, the home shopping season moving up on the calendar. Diana Olick breaks down what has potential buyers looking for a new home in the dead of winter. Plus, Bentley makes its bid to make a bigger push into the electric auto market. Details on all the stories you'll be talking about when Worldwide Exchange returns.
Uh-oh, there you go.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. Listen now to ESPN Daily on TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? We've got you covered. With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to every NFL game live as it's happening.
LaShawn McCoy has an opening on the right side, punches into the end zone for the touchdown.
Or catch it later on demand.
Offset backs behind Mahomes. The give is to Williams. Starts right, cuts it back to the left, and blows into the end zone for the touchdown.
You call the plays. Follow the NFL anytime, anywhere, all season long with TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Welcome back. It may be the heart of winter, but the surge we see for the spring housing market is apparently kicking off today. Diana Olick joins us from Washington to explain. Diana, what is making people get out there in the dead of winter?
Well, Deirdre, it's the severe shortage of homes for sale is actually changing the calendar for the whole housing market. Spring was historically the busiest buying season, but apparently January is the new April. Spring starts now, according to Realtor.com. It found that from 2015 through 2018, the peak month for average views per listing on its site was, of course, April. January lagged by a full 16%. But in 2019, January was just 1% slower than February, and in 20 of the largest 100 metro markets, January surged to the top. It was the busiest month for views in cities including New York, LA, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Seattle, San Francisco, Atlanta, Denver, and San Jose. In 2018, that was true for just 3 of the top 100 metros. Now, Atlanta is particularly competitive this year, according to real estate agent Melissa Fuentes, who says she will hit the ground running with clients today.
I've gotten at least 30% more phone calls already to start the home search in January. It's a race out here, so it's either they get started fast or they wait until the actual spring market and they miss out on all the inventory.
Now, the number of homes for sale in November, which is the latest reading, was down 9.5% annually. And the supply of entry-level homes, that is priced below $200,000, was a stunning 16.5% lower than in 2018. And that's what's causing all the competition, Deirdre.
So, Diana, strong start then, but can we read into the rest of the year here? How does this typically work? Do you think that these levels can be sustained, or are they likely to pull back?
Well, I think the problem is going to be that inventory supply. Usually in the fall, you see it rise. We did not see it this past fall. So if we start to see more buying now, you'll probably see a whole lot less inventory come spring when all those buyers are out there again in the spring season looking to move over the summer, which is historically when that happens. It's going to be all about getting more homes on the market, more sellers out there, and of course, getting the builders to ramp up production.
Right, Diana. Well, thank you for that. Let's find out what else you're going to be talking about today. Time for this morning's top trending stories. And good morning again, Rahel.
Hi, Dee. Okay, so Bentley is joining some of its competitors in moving into the electric car space. The company's chief executive says that future products will be all about electrification, adding that 2025 is when the company is likely to introduce a credible battery electric Bentley. For now, the luxury automaker is focused on firming up production and design details. It previously unveiled concept designs for an electric car called the Bentley EXP100. That'll likely be the blueprint for its future cars. And Bentley is part of Volkswagen. So they may rely on that sort of, they may rely on that part of the company to help with its design and
it may be because I live in California and there's like Teslas all around me and Priuses all around me, but 2025 seems extremely late to me.
It does, but it's Bentley. I mean, Bentley and electric cars, it doesn't even seem like it'd be the same, but
I don't know.
I
feel like everyone needs to have an electric car, and this year is such a hot year for it.
Yeah.
And, Tesla has a high-end electric vehicle, so
well, Bentley's trying to get into the game.
Let's see.
So no denying that streaming has grown in popularity over the last decade, but now we have some pretty incredible figures. So the Recording Industry Association of America says that it now accounts for 80% of the American music market. That surpasses both digital downloads and physical sales. But get this, back in 2010, streaming only held 7% of the market. So despite the spike in popularity, shares of top streaming company Spotify, pretty flat, up less than 1% since its 2018 market debut. What I think is interesting is now when you're talking to your friends about music and playlists, it's like, are you a Tidal person? Are you an Apple Music person? Are you a Pandora person?
That's right.
I am a Spotify person because I think they have the best playlists.
I'm a Spotify person through and through also. I liked songs and that was acquired by Google, and then all those playlists went away. But it's interesting how this industry has consolidated over the decade, and those figures are absolutely stunning.
Amazing. And one thing I also heard anecdotally is that now you're noticing that with newer songs, some of them are much shorter, like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, so that you stream them more often.
Oh, interesting.
Sneaky.
There you go.
Okay, so the wait time for one of Disney Plus's most anticipated series just got a bit shorter. The company announced that WandaVision, one of several Avengers spin-offs hitting the platform, will be released this year, though it didn't provide a specific date, but it was previously slated for 2021. The series will now be one of 2 Marvel offerings hitting the app alongside Captain America spin-off Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Season 2 of the hit show The Mandalorian will premiere this year as well. And we know Disney, what a year 2019 was for the company. I think they had 40% of the U.S. box office in 2019. This is Disney Plus, of course, but still, it looks like their hot streak. They hope that it continues. We'll see.
Right, and they're really leaning on their franchises to do so, which is
cross-promote.
So interesting. I mean, it's like they're not even trying to create anything completely new, but they don't need to.
Yeah, they already have such a base.
And you're starting to see why you go to Disney Plus, why you'll go to HBO Max, why you go to Netflix. So
I don't have Disney Plus.
You don't?
No.
Well,
I am a company person.
You'll be
I'm going to get Peacock.
There you go. You do have Netflix, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Orange is the New Black. That's right.
Yes.
Rahel, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, let's turn to sports and what's become a New Year's Day tradition, the NHL Winter Classic. And I'm so happy that we got some hockey in here as a Canadian. This year, the Dallas Stars taking on the Nashville Predators outdoors in front of more than 80,000 fans at the Cotton Bowl in Texas. The game was tied with less than 30 seconds to go. Dallas on the power play, and they score on the one-timer. The Stars would add one more goal before the final buzzer to beat the Predators 4-2. The NHL will head north for next year's game to Target Field in Minneapolis. There you have it. Quite the shot. On deck, we break down what to anticipate in the new year in terms of trading as markets look poised to keep their 2019 gains going. Plus, the latest on how former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn was able to make his dramatic escape from Japan. Worldwide Exchange is back in just a moment.
Do you have
The Grand DFS sale featuring Wallace.
Hello.
And Gromit.
Well, say hello, lad.
Every sofa is made to order.
By a speedy Sofa-matic machine.
By hand.
Oh, suit yourself.
So you can have your sofa exactly how you want it.
Made of cheese?
Not that exactly.
Oh, probably a good thing, eh, Gromit? It'd be gone in a jiffy.
The Grand DFS sale is now on.
How about a cushion made of cheese? Or a footstool?
Pascal gobbles up the rebound and slams it down.
Catch your favorite NBA team right here on TuneIn.
A step back, deep three is up and in!
Search NBA on TuneIn and hear all the action. The NBA lives on TuneIn.
Be better informed, be better prepared. The Better Network is on TuneIn. This is Brent Musburger. Search BETR and start hanging out with me and my guys in the desert weekday afternoons. The Better Network is now on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit tunein.com/premium to upgrade.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Welcome back. Time for the executive recap. All the headlines you need in 60 seconds. We're learning new details about former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan. According to Reuters, Ghosn was smuggled out of house arrest in Tokyo by a private security company that took him out of the country on a private jet. Another report says Japanese authorities allowed Ghosn to carry a spare French passport while out on bail. Warren Buffett apparently passed on the chance to buy Tiffany's last year. According to a report, the Oracle of Omaha approached by the jewelry giant about making a counteroffer to LVMH's bid, but Buffett declined. The apparent decision extends Berkshire Hathaway's 4-year stretch without making a major acquisition. And Airbus is poised to reclaim the title of world's largest plane maker. According to a report, the company leaned on extra resources in the final stretch of 2019 to hit 863 plane deliveries, topping its target of 860. As a result, for the first time since 2011, Airbus is expected to overtake Boeing for the top spot. This, of course, as it continues to face its 737 MAX crisis. Now we have an upgrade to tell you about to start the new year. I believe it's the first one. Canaccord Genuity says 2020 will be an electric year for the EV revolution, and as a result, it is upgrading Tesla, bumping its price target from $375 to $515. That is now the highest price target on the street. Reasons for the upgrade, they include strong demand, shrinking balance sheet worries, and new models in the pipeline. That stock in extended trade is up 1.2%, coming off a very stellar 2019 where it was up about 35%. Now, let's take also a quick look at the markets. 2019, of course, in the books, with the major averages posting their best year in the past 6. Now we embark on a new month, a new year, and a new decade, and we're poised for a pretty strong start if these implied numbers hold. Let's bring in Jeff Kilberg, CEO of KCAM Financial and a CNBC contributor. Good morning, Jeff, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, dear Jeff, from Chicago. We are excited and constructive on the new year.
Great. I want to get your take on Tesla. We just saw that upgrade, $515 price target. Do you have a take on Tesla?
Well, it's a pretty lofty price target, no doubt about it. And look at the month of December, up over 23%. So it has that sensational move in December. I think the momentum stays intact. I know the Cybertruck has really boosted a lot of emotion and a lot of movement in the stock price, but I think they're still going to be held to the tape of the fact that will they deliver on the numbers that Elon Musk continues to promise and boast about. If he can deliver, then you will see momentum towards that $500 level. But right now, as it closed about $418, there are a lot of expectations to see this kind of back and fill and test back under $400 short term.
Right, it's always that question for Musk. Now, looking, Jeff, at tech more broadly, I mean, it's been the performer of the last year and the last decade. Does that continue, broadening that out?
Well, Deirdre, a great point. The last two sectors from the last decade that we really liked were consumer cyclicals. XLY is the ETF we like to look at, and also XLK, which is technology. So technology, broadly last decade, we saw the Netflix, we saw some of the names, but we talked earlier in the show about Apple and Microsoft. Apple and Microsoft contributed to over 15% of the S&P 500's gains, which was nearly 30% for the year of 2019. So that momentum, we look at a lot of relative strength. That's what we incorporate and utilize in our model portfolios here at KKM. And we think that momentum is still intact. So yes, some of the high flyers like the Apples, even in the top 5 holdings of that XLK, you see Visa, you see MasterCard, you see Intel, you see Apple and Microsoft. They all have the momentum intact. And right now, it seems like a lot of people are going to be putting money to work today on January 2nd, Deirdre.
All right, Jeff, you mentioned a few of the big names, but you also omitted a few. How are you thinking of Amazon and Alphabet as we head into 2020?
Well, look, Amazon is up about 23% year to date. Yes, it was a little bit of a laggard, but they have a lot of good things going for them. If you talk about Amazon Prime, I think it continues to make people crawl deeper into the ecosystem. I know personally we use Amazon for just about everything. And now my kids are getting more and more involved in Amazon Prime. So I think Amazon has a lot of tailwind despite the fact that they were laggards. So these are names that we want to add to as the year presents opportunity. But right now it seems like it's been such a sensational ride. It was the Santa Claus rally of all Santa Claus rallies. No matter how you look at it, the Fed, that consistency, that persistency that they are bringing in the market has allowed the markets to move higher. So as long as the 10-year note is staying under 1.95%, and that's remarkable. Think about it, Deirdre. Here we are in 2020, a new decade, and we're still sub 2% in the 10-year. But that accommodative stand is really going to allow for stock markets to gain and move higher domestically.
All right, Jeff, you, along with a lot of this street, is sounding pretty optimistic, of course. Not going to see a repeat of the gains that we saw this past year. But what, if anything, is going to be keeping you up at night as we head into 2020?
Well, I think it's the Fed. You know, we talk a lot about the U.S.-China trade tariff conversation. Of course, it's an election year. Historically speaking, Deirdre, we have seen the election layers really bolster and help markets. But I do worry about the Fed. They were really, they switched stance from late December of 2018 to where we were in 2019. They were supposed to really move the rates 3 times. They're supposed to rate hike 3 times and end up cutting rates 3 times. So that about face, we will see how they continue to follow through on that messaging, that accommodative messaging. As long as that's intact, Deirdre, I think the markets are in a pretty good spot because the economy is quite strong here domestically.
Why does that worry you, Jeff? Do you think that the Fed could actually change its stance again this year?
Oh, we worry about the Fed all the time. I started trading these pits over 25 years ago, Deirdre, and the Fed policy is always a concern, but more importantly, a Fed policy mistake. Some type of Fed policy mistake, that could really jeopardize the markets here in 2020, but I don't think we are going to see that, but that's always a situation that keeps me up at night.
And finally, Jeff, what's going to be the impetus for next year? I mean, a lot of what drove last year, you mentioned interest rates, those cuts, what's going to be driving, returns in the coming year?
Well, I think one of the sentiment components is all the bears. A lot of great bears come on here on CNBC, talk about the markets going lower, recession talk. That just continues to push people in because they're chasing alpha. We saw a lot of money managers chasing alpha, and here we are in January repositioning. So hang in there, Deirdre. It's going to be a great year.
Absolutely. Okay, let's hope so. Jeff, thanks very much for being with us. Happy New Year to you. That is it for Worldwide Exchange this morning. Squawk Box begins right now.
Good morning. Well, figures, doesn't it? Stocks surging. To start the new year, we'll talk trade, politics, and the other big market catalysts for 2020.
Arrested hundreds of protesters in Hong Kong after New Year's Day rallies. We've got the latest from a city in crisis.
And new details on Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan and his plan to clear his name from Lebanon. It's Thursday, January 2nd, 2020. 2020. Squawk Box begins right now. Barbara Walters.
Yeah, I knew exactly.
Because you watched Ryan Seacrest. 2020. They played 100 of those.
I know. I was like, stop. Make it stop. Make it
stop.
How
many of the musicians have you ever heard of or seen before?
I didn't watch that much because I fell asleep and woke up to watch the ball drop.
No, I watched it. I do like, I got to say, I don't know about the ink everywhere because I can't really see what he looks like. Post Malone, but he's really good. He's really talented. Did you see that?
No.
Okay.
No,
Markets are up. Sorry.
It's not 2020.
2020. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We are in 2020, so it's
We
fair.
are in 2020. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan. Andrew is out today. But check this out. The U.S. equity futures at this hour on the first trading day of the year are indicated sharply higher. This comes after an incredibly strong finish at the end of the year. Dow futures this morning up by 167 points. S&P futures up by about 17. The NASDAQ up by 64. So you are looking at new records once again if we open at these levels.
And every January we say it, first day, so goes the first week, so goes the first week, so goes the first month, and that portends good things for and it never really holds true one way or another.
Yeah.
But if you had yesterday or recently, if you had to predict the knee-jerk, at least what the opinion would be about the beginning of this year would be down. Everybody,
Maybe
it's like we can't add on. We can't keep going up.
Putting some of the gains in the books, making sure you lock in some of those.
And maybe this is a one-day thing. You know, maybe it starts going down tomorrow, or whatever. But everybody, we're going to have a guy on who said, "I expect profit."
This was not what I expected.
Nobody does. The most confounding thing the market tries to fool as many people as can would for it to be up 200 points on the first trading day after a 28% gain for the year. And it's up again.
Yeah.
But who knows?
We'll see. Also, let's take a look at what's been happening in the Treasury market this morning. Yields there for the 10-year, at least right now, looking at 1.918%, so well above the 1.9% that we finally broke through last week, I should say, or earlier this week. Sorry, it's not Monday. It's Thursday today. The 2-year right now is yielding 1.573%.
And a developing story in Iraq. Iraqi protesters have now withdrawn from the perimeter of the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. A U.S. military spokesman says the embassy is now completely surrounded and secured by security forces. Yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo postponed a planned trip to Ukraine to deal with the ongoing developments out of Baghdad. The people that I follow on Twitter and that somehow get to me, it's an unfortunate situation. The embassy is scorched. It was a big response from the Trump administration, starting with a lot of Marines, a lot of paratroopers, a lot of people deployed. And as a result, some people were talking about it being overkill, but as a result, it was not the same situation as Benghazi. And my people say at least someone picked up a phone when the ambassador called that he needed help. At least this time around, someone was there to actually respond and come in and do what was necessary.
I don't think the ambassador was there. He had been away.
No, I know, but you know what I mean. That our people that are in peril, it wasn't a. I don't know what happened at Benghazi, but we didn't do those people any service, any good at that point, right? I mean, we got no one came. They were on their own. You've seen the movie, right? It's horrible what finally happened. But in this case, overwhelming force, and it's a better outcome, it seems like, right? I do see some weird. What's that?
It certainly appears that way. Yes, this is not the same situation where you had lives lost.
Right.
We should tell you about hundreds of people that were arrested as Hong Kong protesters rallied on New Year's Day as well, also into the night. Violence erupted in the city overnight as protesters barricaded roads, threw Molotov cocktails, and vandalized banks and shops. Police used pepper spray, tear gas, and a water cannon to try and break up the protest. In all, the police said that they made 400 arrests on New Year's Day on charges of unlawful assembly and possession of offensive weapons.
And the latest on the trade war with China, or the averted trade war or trade truce, whatever you want to call it. The president says he's going to sign a U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal in a White House ceremony on January 15th. Later, the president said he's going to travel to Beijing to begin talks on the next phase of trade talks.
And the Trump administration is set to announce a ban on flavored e-cigarette cartridges. White House officials tell the CNBC that menthol and tobacco flavors will be exempt and that the new ban won't apply to tank vaping systems that are commonly found at vape shops. It's an effort to try and curb teen vaping. Analysts say that the sweet and fruity flavors represented about 80% of retail store e-cigarette sales in 2019. President Trump is expected to formally make that announcement tomorrow. We're going to be talking about the new measure with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He will join us right around 7:20 a.m. Eastern time, but this is something he'd been pushing for a while, to at least see those flavored cartridges removed. We'll ask him what he thinks about menthol staying there. That's the one issue, I think.
And the public service, I'm starting to see him now just on vaping in general.
Yeah.
It's a like a teen saying, "Hey, God, I finally tried vaping. It's awesome." Talking to his parents or whatever. And I held out for this long, but you didn't know I was doing it, and now that I am, I've done it long enough to where I now have actually developed an addiction to nicotine. It's awesome. Maybe
that's what the PSA says.
No, but it's sarcastic, and then he says, "So to parents, learn as much as you can about this beforehand, so that maybe
you can stop it before you get this addiction."
But it's not just the flavored one that I'm seeing the.
Well, the menthol, that was the huge issue. And I do want to talk to Dr. Scott Gottlieb on that, because I think that was a huge part of the sales for Juul, too. The menthol, the minty flavor kind of coming through.
It's hard to make the argument that it's a bridge to stopping smoking if you don't smoke and you're a teenager.
Right, and you're picking it up based on the idea that it's a fruity flavor or something that comes through.
But then you're just figuring out a new way to deliver